Hi guys, tonight we start by stepping straight into the kind of cold that makes your breath sparkle in the air before it even escapes your lips. You stand on the edge of a high valley snow, stretching in long pale sheets, the world muffled under a blanket so heavy and so quiet that even your heartbeat feels too loud. You feel the temperature sliding down, and you realize that mountain men face this kind of night, regularly sometimes, without even a proper blanket. It is beautiful, sure, but it is also the kind of beauty that bites. And if you were actually here right now, you probably would not survive this for long, so maybe just be grateful you are hearing about it from the safety of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now dim the lights, and you let the cold frontier rise around you. The sun has just dipped behind the snow-tipped ridges, and the first pricking stars slide into the sky as you trudge across crusted snow, the kind that crunches like cracking glass under your boots. You watch the last threads of orange fade out, replaced by a bruised purple, and then the deeper indigo of night. Mountain men learned to read this moment like a clock. They knew that the instant the shadows folded in the cold would harden. There was no gradual shift, no gentle slide. Just a snap, as if the whole world dropped into a different season between one breath and the next. And you feel that snap now, a chill that slips under your coat and settles right against your ribs. A well-known historical fact is that mountain men, especially in the early 1800s, often travelled alone or in small ragged crews, far from any settlement for weeks or months at a time. You imagine that solitude around you now, no town lights, no farmhouses, nothing but the faint glow of snow under starlight. They carried what they could haul on their backs or on a mule, and at night they made the land itself their bedroom. That sounds romantic until you realize that the ground is frozen solid and the air is sharp enough to cut your nostrils. The quirky detail you might not expect is that some of them swore. The cold smelled different at night, like iron or crushed quartz. Something metallic that crept into their nose and stayed there until sunrise. Whether that was real or just exhaustion playing tricks, no one really knows. You move deeper into the valley, crunching along a faint trail barely visible beneath a scattering of new snow. Every few steps you feel little needles of wind poking the back of your neck. The cold up here is not loud. It does not roar or rush. It whispers, it slides, and it asks quietly what you're going to do about it. You pull your coat tighter and try to imagine what choices a mountain man had. Not many, not fancy ones, but they understood cold the way sailors understand waves. It was a constant companion. Historians still argue whether these men exaggerated the brutality of winter in their journals, or whether the stories were understatements toned down because they were too proud to sound like they were complaining. You suspect it might be both. Pride makes people strange. It makes them tell incredible stories while purposely skipping over the parts where they cried or froze or panicked because their fire went out at midnight. The light fades further and the wind picks up just enough to tug your coat to one side. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Night in the mountains is never completely silent. You hear tiny cracks of settling ice, a faint hoot of some distant owl, maybe the soft grinding noises of shifting branches under snow load. Each sound feels amplified. Frontier men listened the same way, not because it was peaceful, but because everything out here was information. A crack could mean fresh snow sliding, a predator moving, or just the trees groaning. You never knew which, and that little uncertainty wrapped around your nerves like a second layer of cold. You find yourself pondering how anyone managed to sleep in this, and not just doze, but actually rest enough to survive months of hard travel hunting, trapping and hauling heavy gear. The truth is their sleep was less like modern bedtime and more like a truce negotiated with nature. Never comfortable, rarely continuous, always shaped by the demands of frost and darkness. You feel that tension building already, as if the night is testing you, measuring what you will do next. The wind shifts again, and the temperature dips sharply. It feels like someone opened a door to deep space. The breath you release clouds in front of your face, thick and slow-moving. You remember reading that some trappers claimed they could feel temperature drops before they happened, a tingling along their cheeks or fingertips. Science might not support that exactly, but after enough nights outdoors, your body probably becomes its own kind of weather instrument. You stumble a little on uneven snow, steadying yourself on a scraggly pine trunk. Bark flakes off under your glove brittle as old paper. This close, you smell the resin faint and sharp. The scent mixes with the icy air, giving the moment an oddly comforting edge. Mountain men often relied on trees for that small sense of comfort. They slept beneath them, leaned against them, used their branches as windbreaks, and sometimes even thanked them out loud, though which ones did that and which considered it nonsense is lost to time. You continue walking, feeling the terrain dip gradually, and you sense the cold deepening, not just temperature but atmosphere. Nights like this have layers, a soft layer near sunset, a colder one after full dark, and then the worst one in the deep middle hours when the moon is high and the world is at its most brittle. You're heading into that deeper layer now, whether you want to or not. Your fingers twitch inside your gloves, not from pain, yet just the early stiffness that tells you you're losing heat. You shake them out and picture a mountain man doing the same thing, except his gloves might have been rough buckskin or repurposed scraps. Nothing fancy, nothing insulated. He would clench his hands, blow warm air into them, and sometimes stick them under his armpits. Every move required thought. You stop at last on a slight rise, a place where a real mountain man might pause as well. You feel the air swirling and the darkness tightening around you. You take a slow breath, and in that breath, the entire cold frontier seems to more fully settle. This is the world as they knew it. Stark, unforgiving, oddly enchanting. A place where survival depended on knowledge, instinct, and a stubborn refusal to lie down and freeze. And tonight you follow them into that story step by step, shiver by shiver, until you understand exactly how they slept when the mercury plunged far below zero. You linger on that rise only long enough to let your eyes adjust. The cold is settling deeper now, slipping around your ankles like a curious animal testing your warmth. The ground beneath you feels firm and unforgiving, but you know a mountain man would not stay exposed up here. He would move, always move, searching for a place where the night might be a little less cruel. Choosing a campsite wisely was not just practical, it was survival. And now you step forward, letting the landscape guide you the same way it guided them. Your boots sink into patches of soft powder, then scrape over frozen crust, each sound echoing faintly through the valley. You look around and try to picture the options a frontier traveller would consider. No one chose a campsite based on comfort. Comfort was a luxury that simply did not exist above timberline in winter. Instead, the terrain mattered, wind direction mattered, even the shape of the snowdrifts mattered. A historical fact that fits here is that many mountain men learned their winter camping habits from indigenous teachers whose knowledge of the land far outpaced anything the newcomers brought with them. The techniques spread quietly past from one cold traveller to another. You descend the slope into a narrow draw, its floor choked with small pines and fir saplings. Immediately you notice the difference. The wind, which had felt sharp and personal up on the rise, softens to a dull murmur here. It hisses through the branches above you but does not cut into your skin. By instinct you tilt your head upward and watch the way the treetops sway. That was something the old trappers did too, reading the canopy for hidden gusts so they could pick spots shielded from the worst of the night. A quirky little tidbit floats into your mind. Some mountain men claim the best campsites revealed themselves, because smoke from your breath rose in a straight line there. If it wavered or drifted, you kept searching. Whether that was a real rule or just bravado wrapped in frontier superstition is unclear. But you find yourself testing it anyway, exhaling gently and watching your breath spiral upward. It drifts slightly to the left, which means this draw is better than the ridge, but not perfect. You push onward, weaving between trunks until you reach a cluster of boulders half buried in snow. You immediately feel how the air changes when you step behind one. Less wind, less bite. You put a glove against the rock and feel the faintest hint of warmth. Not actual heat, just a kind of thermal neutrality compared to the icy air. Mountain men prized spots like this. Rock outcrops created natural pockets, where snow piled unevenly, acting as accidental insulation walls. Historians still argue whether these men chose such places deliberately because of a scientific understanding of airflow, or simply because centuries of trial and error taught them what worked. You do not need an academic footnote to sense the truth. Standing here, you feel sheltered. Even a few degrees difference can decide whether you shiver all night or drift off for short, merciful moments of sleep. You continue your slow scouting the way a seasoned trapper once would after a day of hauling beaver pelts or tracking game trails. Every step is deliberate measured. The cold forces a kind of mindfulness on you. You listen to the snow crunch underfoot and imagine the same sound beneath a pair of worn moccasins. Mountain men often wore those instead of heavy boots, because the soft leather helped them move quietly and feel the terrain better. That sounds romantic until you realize the trade-off was less insulation. Walking in moccasins across frozen ground meant the cold crept directly into the soles of your feet. Choosing a good campsite helped counter that misery. You reach another cluster of trees, these taller and straighter. Their branches interlock overhead, forming a loose canopy that blocks just enough of the sky to keep drifting snow from falling directly on you. You run your hand along a trunk, feeling the rough bark under your glove. A place like this would have mattered for more than just wind. It would protect embers if you built a fire later, keep sparks from disappearing into the void of night. You pause and let the quiet settle. The cold is everywhere, but here it feels manageable, as if the land itself is offering a small concession. You can almost hear an old mountain man grunting in approval before dropping his pack to the ground. For them, a sight like this meant fewer nighttime adjustments, fewer moments jolting awake because snow fell on their face, or wind tore open their blankets. In a world where sleep came in thin slices, a campsite that removed even one hazard mattered immensely. You glance at the ground next, because another thing they watched for was drainage. If the land dipped too much cold air, pulled in hollows, and made an already icy night downright vicious. If it rose too sharply, the winds cut straight across. But here the slope is gentle. Cold collects nearby, but not directly beneath you. You feel it instinctively, the same way someone seasoned might have tested the air with a few slow breaths. You squat and brush away some surface snow with your glove. Underneath the ground is frozen but level. Level mattered more than you might think. Sleeping on a slant meant sliding into cold pockets, or rolling out of coverings, and if you somehow drifted off into dreams, you might wake up jammed against a tree root or slumped into a drift. You smooth the snow absently, imagining a mountain man doing the same, deciding where to spread his blankets or hides. You straighten up again, taking in the surroundings. The world is dim but not dark. The snow carries enough moonlight to outline every trunk and branch around you. You can hear the faint rustle of something small moving under the snowpack, maybe a mouse tunneling. Those little noises become strangely soothing after a while, part of a nighttime rhythm. Frontier sleepers heard them too, though they probably paid more attention, because food shortages sometimes made even tiny creatures seem tempting. You shift your weight and survey the view, trying to think the way they would. Water source. Not too close, because open streams created humidity that chilled the bones. Not too far either, because you needed it at dawn. Predators. Always a concern. But a spot like this, tucked among boulders and trees, gave enough visibility to see movement, but enough concealment to avoid being silhouetted against the snow. You take another long breath, watching it drift into the air. This place would do. This is where you would stop if you had miles behind you, sore legs and gear weighing down your shoulders. You feel the relief of choosing well, a tiny victory in a hostile place. And tonight, mountain men sought exactly that kind of victory. Choosing the right campsite meant the difference between a night spent shivering uncontrollably and one spent shivering only intermittently, which in their world counted as sleeping well. With the night widening around you, you settle into the space, slowly imagining the next steps that follow once a site is chosen. The cold presses close, but now it feels like a challenge you understand. The first part of the ritual is complete. The land has given you a place to rest, and now you move deeper into the night, ready to shape that space into something that resembles shelter. You stand quietly in your chosen campsite, letting the wind settle into its new, softer pattern around you. The trees sway with long, patient movements above your head, and for a moment, the cold feels almost like a companion. Still sharp, still serious, but less like a threat, and more like a steady presence you are learning to negotiate with. Mountain men understood that feeling. They knew that once you picked a place to sleep, the next step was to study the snow itself, because snow, strangely enough, could save your life just as easily as it could steal it. And now you crouch down, brushing your glove across its surface as the moonlight paints it with bluish shadows. You test the depth the same way they did, pressing down and feeling for the stubborn weight beneath. Snow has moods. Some of it is powdery and shifts like fine sand. Some of it is crusted, almost icy, capable of supporting your weight long enough to fool you into taking a risky step. And some forms, usually the layers that have been melted and refrozen, turn into slabs that behave like stone. A historical fact that pops into your thoughts is that experienced trappers often read the snow the way sailors read waves. They knew from the crunch, the hardness, and the layering what the night would bring. A deep powder meant extra insulation, but also higher risk of sinking and losing heat. A firm crust meant the cold had held strong for many days, and the temperature tonight might be even sharper. You sift a little snow between your fingers, lifting it into the air and letting the breeze carry it off in drifting, glittering flakes. The wind direction matters more than anything else at this point. Wind decides where drifts form and where heat gets stolen from you fastest. You tilt your head and watch the movement of your breath in the air, then the sparks of powder dancing across the snowpack. Even before you feel the gusts, you start to see where they push the light flakes. Mountain men trained themselves to catch such signs instantly. They could tell where the air was funneling, where the cold gathered, and where the snow piled high enough to give them a natural windbreak. A quirky little tidbit whispers into your mind here. Some frontier wanderers used to claim that snowdrifts were like spirits, and if you paid attention, they would point the way to safety. Not literal voices or shapes, but the quiet guidance of nature arranging itself into clues. It sounds whimsical, maybe even exhausted, but after a night or two in these conditions, you can understand how someone might start imagining a personality in the way snow gathers and slides. You step to the edge of a drift, now examining its contour. It rises on the windward side, but its leeward slope dips gently into a shallow bowl. That bowl is what you are after. Historians still argue whether the mountain men preferred to sleep beside drifts because of their insulating qualities, or because the drifts created little pockets where the wind could not whip the heat away. But whichever reason was more accurate, you feel the logic when you place your palm near the bowl. The air here is just a hint less aggressive. Not warm, never warm, but calmer. You circle slowly around the drift, crunching through thin crusts with each careful step. Beneath your boots, the snow emits a brittle creak. The sound echoes faintly off the boulders nearby. You keep moving until you find the place where the drift dips low and wide enough that it would shelter a body curled beneath blankets or hides. You take another breath and let your attention settle on the snow around you. The more you watch, the more you notice how the wind combs the surface in long, tight strokes. It shapes the land, subtly guiding you to the places that stay still and protected. You kneel again and sweep aside a small pile of surface powder, watching how it reveals different colours underneath. The palest layers, almost shimmering white, are the new snow. Deeper layers shift toward greyish tones, or even faint blue if the moisture content is high. A mountain man reading these layers could guess how recently a storm had passed, or how soon another might arrive. In your case, all you need is to decide whether this snow is stable enough to dig into, or whether it will crumble the moment you put weight on it. The surface holds, but the layer beneath crumbles gently. This is good. Powder beneath crust creates a pocket that can trap warm air from a fire or from your body. It is not cozy in any normal sense, but in a night like this, anything that slows the cold is a blessing. You stand up again and scan for tree roots or fallen branches. Mountain men did not think of snow as an enemy. Snow could be shaped, moulded, borrowed from. It could create a wall or a roof or a soft mound that blocked just enough wind to let you drift off for a few precious minutes. You run your hand along the top of the drift and imagine how they would scoop out a depression along the leeward side. Nothing too deep. Dig too far and you expose yourself to ground cold. Dig too shallow and you have no barrier against the blowing air. It was an art, a small but vital one, balancing height and depth. And like all winter arts, they learned it through mistakes. You picture some half-frozen traveller waking up to find that his carefully constructed bowl collapsed and dumped snow into his blankets. It must have happened often. The unevenness of the terrain grows more noticeable as you shift position again. You step where the snow thins and uncover patches of dark soil, where the wind has brushed the ground bare. These open spots might seem inviting, but they radiate heat away like little frozen lakes. Mountain men avoided them instinctively. You follow the same instinct, drifting back toward the thicker snow where the air feels momentarily less harsh. You take a few more steps, scanning ridges and dips until you spot the subtle curve of a drift that blends seamlessly with the sheltering boulder you noticed earlier. This is ideal. Snow combined with rock creates a double barrier and a natural alcove. The boulder blocks wind directly. The drift cushions its base, stopping cold air from pooling. You walk over and crouch beside it, your breath puffing slowly around your face. You press your palm to the snow again, shaping the contact with a soft push. The surface compacts slightly, forming a smooth edge. You imagine a mountain man doing the same, sculpting the snow with practiced movements. They never worried about symmetry or aesthetics. They chased function, and snow offered that if you treated it the right way. You stand and admire the structure around you. It is such a small thing, a simple drift in a dark forest, yet it holds meaning. It shows how nature can offer shelter even in its harshest moments. The old trappers understood this dance. They read snow the way you now read these shadows, and with each breath you feel a little closer to their world. As you take a final slow step back, letting the cold settle around your shoulders, you realize the snow is not your enemy tonight. It is a guide, a sculptor, a reluctant ally. It shaped where they slept, how they slept, and whether they lived to see morning. And now, you let it shape your next move as the night grows even deeper. You ease yourself into the quiet space you chose, the snow drift curling gently beside the boulder like a pale shoulder. The trees murmur above you, their needles shifting with a sound almost like fabric brushing together. Now that the immediate task of choosing a place is done, you turn your attention to what the mountain men often created next. A crude, improvised nest made from whatever natural debris the land offered. It sounds a bit wild, maybe even primitive, but as you crouch to gather loose branches and scattered needles, you begin to understand how essential it was. Insulation did not appear out of thin air. You had to build it with your hands. You start by scraping away the top layer of loose powder, forming a shallow oval. Not deep, just enough to mark the space where your body will rest. Frontier travellers did the same, not because they were trying to be neat, but because the first few inches of snow are always the coldest layer. Beneath that, the pack is denser, sometimes slightly warmer. One well-recorded detail from the era notes that trappers often preferred to lie on compacted snow rather than bare ground because soil could leach heat more aggressively than frozen flakes. It sounds counterintuitive until you test it. When you press your gloved hand to the packed snow, it feels firm but less icy than expected. Ground cold sinks deeper into your bones. You rise again, looking around for what the forest can offer. Branches, needles, torn bark, anything that can be piled thick enough to trap air. The trick, as mountain men understood, was creating space between the layers. Air is warmth if you trap it. You gather a handful of fir boughs and tug them loose from a fallen limb. The needles release a sharp, resinous aroma that cuts through the cold. You gather more arms, filling with green clusters until you can drop them onto your little hollow. The pile rustles softly, releasing a scent that reminds you faintly of old Christmas trees and campfires that never quite go out. As you arrange the branches, you recall something amusing yet rarely mentioned. Some seasoned woodsman insisted that pine needles made better bedding than spruce because they sighed less when you moved. Whether that was honest observation or just one trapper teasing another is hard to know, but it makes you smile. The forest floor crackles quietly as you adjust the layers, smoothing them until they form a thick cushion. When you press a knee into it, the insulation crunches softly but supports your weight. You stand, stretching your back as the cold pricks at your skin. You begin to add a layer of dry grasses, the thin stalks whispering as you bundle them together. These grasses were lifesavers for many travellers, though they rarely earned poetic praise. They slipped into moccasins for warmth. They lined crude shelters. They even filled spare shirts to create makeshift quilts. One obscure, often overlooked anecdote claims that some mountain men stuffed grass under their shirts until they resembled lumpy scarecrows. It worked, though. Grass held heat far better than most cloth of the period. You add handfuls, now spreading them across the fir boughs until they create a nest-like impression. It looks almost animalistic, a rough den you would expect from a creature burrowing for warmth. And that is exactly the point. Many frontier wanderers look to animals for guidance in winter. Burrows, nests, dens, all of them relied on layers of natural debris to hold heat. You're repeating the same instinctive pattern. You pause for a moment, glancing at the treetops where the wind hums lazily. The night has deepened, and with it the temperature. The air carries a crisp, metallic taste, the sort that finds its way into your lungs and stays there. You imagine what a mountain man felt on nights like this. The weight of exhaustion tugging at his shoulders, the ache in his feet, the desire to simply drop onto the ground and sleep wherever he stood. But he knew better. He knew that skipping this step, the building of a debris nest, was an invitation to misery or worse. You step over to a cluster of fallen limbs and break off more pieces, laying them down along the outer rim of your nest. These thicker branches act as a sort of retaining wall, keeping the inner debris from shifting too much during the night. It is not elegant. It is not symmetrical. It does not need to be. You kneel again, smoothing the bedding with a few slow strokes of your gloved hand. The cold nips at your fingertips even through the fabric. You pause to watch your breath float upward. The rhythm of the moment softens your mind, makes you think about how these men must have moved, with a mixture of resignation and stubbornness. Their journals rarely described fear directly. Instead, they wrote about the tasks, the steps, the routines. Beneath those lines, though, you sense unease. Some researchers question how much fear they masked behind those calm entries. Were they truly fearless, or did they simply refuse to write down the parts that made their hands shake? The answer remains unresolved, a quiet puzzle lingering between the lines of their old ink. You shake off the thought and return to your task. The nest is nearly finished, but not quite. You lean over and check for gaps, pockets where the cold might pool. Wind always finds the smallest openings, so you wedge in more dry grass and firm branches, packing them lightly so they do not compress into a cold mat. The sound of the grass crunching under your weight echoes faintly through the clearing. It has a comforting tone, like the crinkle of an old blanket being unfolded. When you sit back and study your handiwork, it finally looks like something that could sustain life for a few hours. A crude cradle of forest scraps shaped to cradle your body and keep you just separated enough from the ice beneath. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but comfort is relative. Out here in this black and blue winter world, a little insulation is a miracle. You remember another curious detail that fits perfectly here. Some accounts from fur trappers mention using moss when available, claiming it was the warmest natural bedding of all. Thick, spongy, and surprisingly dry once pulled from tree bark. You glance around in the moonlight, your eyes scanning trunks for patches of the soft green growth. You find some, but it is frozen stiff, more like thin ice sheets than spongy pillows. In warmer seasons it would have been ideal. Tonight your grass and branches will have to do. You settle carefully onto the nest, letting the structure adjust beneath your weight. It creaks, shifts, then settles again. The cold still touches you because cold always does, but you feel a barrier now, a fragile shield between your body and the frozen ground. This is exactly what the mountain men worked for each night. Not warmth, but reduced loss. A little less heat escaping, a slightly slower freezing of your toes, a small mercy coaxed out of the wilderness. You lie back for a moment, staring at the sky through the branches. Stars burn cold and distant, flung across the darkness like sparks from a blacksmith's hammer. Your body sinks deeper into the nest, your breath drifting upward like a soft ghost. You feel the subtle cradle of your handmade bedding, and you understand why these men relied on debris nests. They turned the forest floor into a survival tool, one scratchy handful at a time, and as the wind hums gently through the pines, you start to sense the rhythm of the night shifting. The cold thickens, the shadows deepen, and your nest becomes the foundation of whatever sleep you can salvage in the hours ahead. You stay nestled in your crude bed of branches for another slow breath, letting the cold press around you while you decide what comes next. A debris nest keeps you off the worst of the ground chill, but without fire the night would gnaw through every layer you could possibly pile on yourself. Mountain men knew this with absolute certainty, which is why their next ritual centered on the fire lay. And now, as you rise from the nest and step into the open space beside your boulder, you begin to feel the instinctive pull toward building a small patch of flame that can hold back the dark. You brush frost from your gloves and examine the area around you. Fire placement out here was never random. It was carefully judged, a relationship between flame wind and the sleeper tucked nearby. Too close and sparks could leap onto a blanket. Too far and the heat would vanish into the night. One well-documented observation from early frontier journals notes that trappers grew almost obsessive about arranging their fires so the heat reflected directly toward their bedding. You sense the same focus settling into your muscles as you crouch and sweep away loose snow. You clear a small oval, scraping down to the firm packed layer beneath. The snow emits a dull crunch, and each movement fills the air with little showers of crystals. When your clearing is finished, it resembles a tiny white bowl, a perfect place to cradle a fire. You place your glove on the exposed surface. It feels slightly damp but stable. If the ground were too uneven or too soft, the fire could collapse its own base, smothering itself in melted snow. Tonight, though, the world feels solid, as though the cold has fused the landscape into one piece of iron. You rise again, scanning the forest for the next resource fuel. Dry branches, deadfall, brittle twigs, anything that will catch quickly. Your breath puffs ahead of you in pale, lazy clouds as you move toward a cluster of trees and begin testing fallen limbs under your boot. They snap with clean, sharp cracks. Good. Moist wood hisses and steams, but dry wood sings when it burns. You gather several armfuls, stacking them carefully near your fire pit. While you work, a curious piece of old wood's law surfaces in your thoughts. Some trappers insisted that the best firewood came from trees whose bark peeled easily, claiming it caught flame faster because the wind had dried it. Others mocked this idea completely, saying bark was irrelevant compared to density. It is one of those little contradictions that historians scratch their heads over because both sides left confident notes behind. You smile quietly at the thought, knowing that experts still cannot fully untangle why some men swore by one rule and others by the opposite. You crouch again and begin preparing the structure of your fire lay. Mountain men rarely just tossed wood in a pile, they engineered it. A stable fire that lasts long into the night requires a specific shape, almost like building a tiny house of heat. You start with thin twigs, arranging them in a small cone, and your gloves brush against the crackling dryness of each piece. The air is still enough that your breath drifts gently across the structure without disturbing it. Next comes slightly thicker wood laid in a loose crisscross around the base. Airflow is everything. Without space for the fire to breathe, you will get smoke instead of flame. One old account from a fur brigade describes how a trapper could build a fire in the dark with his eyes closed, feeling the balance of the wood by touch alone. You try to imagine that shaping a fire purely through feeling your fingers, learning the architecture of survival. You straighten your back and listen to the forest again. The wind is light to hear the drift and boulder blocking its sharpest edge. Fire in the open mountains is a delicate thing. Even a small gust can knock it sideways and send sparks skittering across the snow. You tilt your head slightly and check the movement of the branches above. They barely sway. This spot will work. You reach for your tinder, imagining what a mountain man would have carried. Shredded bark, dry grasses, maybe a scrap of char cloth tucked deep in a pocket to keep it from dampness. You pull your own handful of grass from your pile and crumple it between your palms until it becomes feathery and light. Then you tuck it carefully under the twig cone. As you prepare to set the spark, another interesting detail drifts through your memory. Some frontier travellers would chew a bit of pitch from pine trees and smear it on their tinder. They believed their spit helped it catch fire more quickly. Whether this was practical or superstition remains an open question among researchers, but you picture the scene and cannot help laughing softly into the night. You kneel again, lean close to the base of your fire lay and strike your spark. The tiny flare glints in the cold air bright for an instant before fading. You strike again, and this time the ember tucks itself into the tinder, glowing like a tiny heart. You blow gently, your breath warm in the sharp night. The ember brightens, the grasses rustle, a faint thread of smoke curls upward, then at last flame appears. It starts as a trembling tongue of light, barely more than a suggestion. But as the twigs catch, the glow strengthens. The fire begins whispering a soft, crackling rhythm that settles something inside your chest. You feed it carefully, placing new pieces with a tenderness you didn't expect. You feel your face warm slightly, though the rest of the forest remains cold and aloof. You sit back on your heels and watch the fire gather itself. Its glow colours the branches above with a soft gold. The snow reflects the light in pale washes, making the whole clearing feel a little less lonely. You ease closer to your debris nest, testing the distance. Close enough for warmth, far enough to avoid danger. Perfect. Fire had personality in nights like this, and the mountain men respected it. Some talked to it quietly, muttering thanks. Others glared at it as if daring it to go out. And a few believed that flames revealed a person's character, because tending a fire in bitter cold required patience, effort, and judgment. You stretch your hands slowly toward the warmth, and feel the sting as circulation begins to return. The fire crackles, and its sound fills the space in a soothing, rhythmic way. It is not comfort in any soft modern sense, but it is safety. It is life. It is that fragile boundary between sleep and freezing. And with the fire now established, you settle in beside it, knowing the night must be faced with both flame and instinct. The glow flicker across your nest, and you feel the first promise of rest stirring in your bones. You sit close to the fire for another long moment, letting its warmth seep across your hands and into the stiff joints beneath your gloves. The flames crackle softly, each spark rising like a tiny firefly, before fading into the cold night air. But mountain men did not rely on fire alone to make it through nights like this. Flames flickered out. Winds changed. Snowstorms smothered heat with shocking speed. So they learned to build something deeper, something that kept warmth long after the fire shrank to its barest glow, and now you prepare to follow their next trick, creating an ember bed. You shift your weight and begin pulling back the top layer of burning wood, exposing the glowing coals beneath. They look alive in a strange, quiet way, pulsing softly like a field of rubies. This is the hidden heart of any fire, the part that holds heat for hours. Early explorers often wrote that a bed of coals could keep a person from freezing, even when the wind cut through every seam of their clothing. The journals never exaggerated how important that heat was. You feel it now, the warmth brushing your shins even through several inches of snow-cooled air. You crouch nearer and stir the coals with a sturdy stick. They shift in a soft avalanche of red and orange, releasing a wave of steady heat. As you work, another curious little detail drifts into your mind. A few trappers used to bury small pieces of iron or metal in the coals and then wrap them in cloth to hold against their chest while they slept. It sounds reckless, maybe even foolish, but accounts insist that it worked when done with care. You glance around your quiet clearing, imagining some half-frozen wanderer clutching a warmed chunk of metal as if it were a living creature. You continue spreading the coals into a flat, even layer, listening to them hiss faintly, when small bits of snow fall from your gloves. Once the bed takes shape, you scoop a thin blanket of fresh snow from the edges of your fire pit and sprinkle it lightly over the glowing surface. It melts instantly, creating a soft crust that muffles the crackle, but keeps the heat trapped. This step feels delicate, almost ceremonial, and you understand why some old woodsmen claim they could sense the perfect amount of snow by instinct. Too much, and you douse the warmth. Too little, and the heat escapes faster than you can benefit from it. Researchers today still puzzle over exactly how effectively these ember beds worked. They debate whether the trapped warmth truly lasted all night, or if the accounts of long-lasting heat were shaped by fatigue and wishful memory. What they do agree on is that the technique existed across several cultures and regions, suggesting it was far more than a campfire myth. You lean back on your heels, now watching the faint glow shining through the thin crust you created. It feels steady, reliable, almost soothing. You move carefully around the glowing patch, scooping more snow to build low banks along the sides. These banks act like walls, directing the heat upward rather than outward. Mountain men had no thermodynamics textbooks, but they understood the way warmth travelled just by watching how steam rose from their breath and how fire warmed their boots faster than their backs. You feel the principle working as you stand up again. The air immediately above the ember bed is warmer, just enough that your face tingles when you lean forward slightly. Now comes the part that requires both courage and caution. You retrieve the branches and fir boughs you set aside earlier, and arrange them above the ember bed, creating a raised platform of sorts. It looks like a rough, uneven grid of natural materials, but its purpose is simple: to keep your body off the direct heat, while still letting warmth seep upward through the gaps. Too close and you would scorch your clothes. Too far and you would lose the benefit entirely. You press down lightly on the platform with your palm. It wobbles just a little but holds steady. It feels strange knowing that you're preparing to sleep above glowing coals. Yet this method carried men through the worst nights the mountains ever offered. One period account describes waking with frost on eyebrows and beard, yet feeling as if the ground itself breathed warm air upward all night long. You can picture that sensation now. The cold above and the heat below, a strange balance between the two. You gather more evergreen boughs, weaving them loosely into the structure until it forms a soft bed of green. The needles brush against your hands, releasing faint bursts of pine scent that mingle with the smoky air from the fire. You smooth the surface with gentle pushes, spreading the branches until they feel secure. They will provide a barrier between your body and the heat, and they will trap air just as your debris nest did. Layering was everything in these conditions. As you work, you notice a subtle shift in the temperature around you. It is not warm by any comfortable definition, but it is less vicious, less biting. It reminds you of standing near an open oven in a cold kitchen, the heat modest but welcome. Your breath still fogs heavily in front of your face, but not quite as quickly as before. You take a moment to admire the ember bed, glowing faintly beneath its cover of snow and boughs. It looks like a creature asleep breathing with slow, steady rhythm. You understand why some trappers gave their fires nicknames, or spoke to them as if they were companions. There is something alive about the way heat moves beneath the surface, hiding just enough to keep you anxious, but present enough to keep you safe. You step back toward your debris nest and consider how the two shelters will work together. Your nest will cradle your body, insulating your sides and back. The ember bed will radiate warmth upward, and the fire, now reduced to a low flame and shimmering coal ring, will add a circle of light that keeps you anchored in this icy world. You kneel beside the ember bed again and test it with a cautious hand. The air above it rises in small warm waves, barely visible but absolutely real. It feels almost like the breath of a large animal sleeping beneath you. This heat, though gentle, could mean the difference between drifting off for an hour or tossing awake in chattering misery. While adding a few final branches, you recall a little-known detail shared by a handful of surviving mountain men in their old age. They claimed that on the coldest nights the embers occasionally made faint popping sounds beneath the snow crust, almost like tiny footsteps or tapping fingers. Some said it unnerved them. Others said it was strangely comforting, a sign that their ember bed still lived. Whether those memories were shaped by age or accuracy is hard to determine, but the image settles beautifully into the moment. You finish your preparations and straighten up, letting the night sweep around you once more. The cold presses from above, deep and unwavering, but now you have a pocket of warmth beneath you, something hidden, steady and dependable. A secret fire tucked into the earth. You ease yourself toward your nest, your boots crunching softly, your breath trailing behind you in long ribbons. When you settle onto the pine boughs above the ember bed, the warmth rises into your clothes immediately. Not a rush, not a flood, but a slow, careful seep like water soaking into dry soil. It makes your muscles shiver in relief. The ember bed holds there beneath you a quiet guardian that mountain men trusted countless times, and now you feel what they felt, a small triumph in a night shaped by cold, a fragile comfort coaxed from glowing coals and careful hands. You settle deeper into your nest, letting the ember bed breathe its faint warmth upward. The fire has dimmed to a soft glow, just enough to mark the circle of safety around you. Still night stretches long ahead, and warmth in weather like this is a fleeting thing. Mountain men survive by piling layer upon layer between themselves and the cold, which brings you to the weight and texture of what they trusted most: buffalo robes and rawhide wraps. You rise slowly, your limbs stiff from the cold air that still presses against your exposed edges. As you stand, you picture the way a trapper would rummage through his gear, at dusk pulling out heavy hides, softened, scraped and smoked over countless hours. Documentation from the period makes it clear that robes made from buffalo hides were among the most prized possessions a frontier traveller could own. Thick, dense, and astonishingly good at trapping heat, they transformed a freezing night into something barely tolerable. You can almost feel the imagined heft of one, now its weight settling across your shoulders like a warm animal. You kneel again beside your nest, imagining the robe unfolding. The hair side would always face inward, the soft undercoat closest to the body. When you run your gloved hand across the pine boughs, you pretend for a moment that it is thick hide instead of evergreen needles. The robe would smell faintly smoky, maybe a little musky, almost like the echo of the plains still clinging to it. In the real frontier, nights that scent would mingle with wood smoke, leather sweat, and winter air, creating a fragrance that only someone who lived out here could ever truly forget. While you adjust the layers of branches beneath you, a strange yet amusing detail from old accounts creeps into your mind. Some trappers joked that rawhide, when it froze solid, could double as a shield or even a makeshift shovel. It stiffened into something almost comically rigid, a far cry from the soft, pliable wrap they preferred. But when thawed and properly conditioned over a fire, rawhide wraps added another layer of defense against the cold. You picture yourself holding one, testing its edge, wondering how anyone slept under something that felt more like a wooden board if the wind had turned it solid a few hours before. You shake your head and pull your attention back to the work at hand, spreading an imaginary hide over the evergreen nest. You pat down the edges, smoothing them so they would rest snugly against your sides. Mountain men often wrapped themselves burrito style, tucking the ends beneath their legs or shoulders so the robe would not flap open if they shifted in their sleep. You mimic the gesture, now slipping gloved fingers along the imaginary border, pressing it close. Already you feel a phantom warmth from the memory of stories describing how long these hides held heat. Clusters of firelight flicker across the snow as you settle the edges. The world beyond the glow feels enormous, vast enough to swallow your tiny patch of comfort. The trees sway softly overhead, their needles chiming together in quiet rhythms. You take a slow breath and think about how this robe represented more than insulation. It represented survival, wealth, status. A trapper who owned a good robe could face a deeper winter than one who relied only on thin wool blankets. Some modern specialists believe these robes were as valuable as rifles or horses for men who spent months in the high country. Their durability alone made them indispensable. You lower yourself again, letting the imagined fur brush against your back. The texture feels rougher than cloth but more forgiving than frozen ground, and the warmth even imagined carries a comforting solidity. A buffalo robe did not just warm you, it cocooned you. It trapped every bit of body heat, pooling it around your torso until the night air felt less predatory. Your mind drifts into the deeper parts of frontier lore as you adjust your posture. A seldom told observation from trapper journals describes how men sometimes arranged their robes in layers, hide on hide with grass or pine needles sandwiched between. The layering acted as primitive insulation, locking in pockets of warm air. The thought gives you an idea, so you gather more fir boughs and adjust them into a pattern that mimics those makeshift layers. You press your back into them experimentally. They rustle, but they also cushion. A moment of stillness washes over you, and you lie there, listening to your surroundings. The wind has quieted even more. Only a faint sigh moves past the branches now, and the fire emits a soft occasional snap as embers settle. You turn your head slightly and glance at the boulder beside you. Its presence feels grounding, solid, a wall at your back. Mountain men often position themselves against rocks or logs, not just for wind protection, but for psychological ease. Being surrounded by emptiness on every side can rattle even the toughest mind. Having something at your back made the night feel less endless. As you nestle into the layers you've created, another unsettled question crosses your thoughts. Researchers remain split on whether buffalo robes were typically worn hair out or hair in while sleeping. Some accounts insist hair in kept heat best. Others argue hair out prevented moisture buildup. The original owners of these hides, the buffalo themselves, certainly never cared. But to the men who carried them across hundreds of miles, the direction mattered. It could be the difference between waking stiff but alive or not waking at all. You adjust your imaginary wrap again, this time pulling the fur side inward in the traditional manner. You tuck the edges around your shoulders, pinning them under your arms. The movement feels instinctive, as though your body already recognizes the logic. Heat gathers quickly when trapped this way. Even in your imagination, the sensation grows vivid enough that you could swear the cold is backing off just a little. You stretch out your legs along the pine bed, letting your boots rest near the ember warmth. The robe drapes across your knees, and you picture its heavy folds moulded to your shape. Trappers sometimes slept with two robes if they were lucky enough to own them. One beneath, one above, like a cocoon of ancient winter fur. Tonight you're making do with one, but even the idea of it feels reassuring. The fire pops again, sending a brighter spark into the air that flickers briefly before fading. You watch it rise and think about how many nights like this unfolded just the same centuries ago. The cold, the bedding, the robe, the faint warmth creeping through layers of pine and fur. The quiet determination of a person willing to face another sunrise in a brutal landscape. You sink deeper, letting the imagined hide curl around your ribs. You feel its warmth begin to pool, mixing with the heat from the ember bed beneath. The cold outside your little shelter remains harsh, but here inside your fur-wrapped nest, you understand why these robes were treasured. They turned a merciless night into something survivable. With your body settled and your mind quieting, you let the robe embrace you, fully preparing you for whatever chill the night decides to send next. You lie still for a few breaths, letting the imagined weight of the buffalo robe settle over you, while the ember bed continues sending soft waves of warmth into your back. The night is deep now, the kind of blue-black that feels almost physical, as if you could reach out and press your hand into it. The fire gives off a faint halo, just enough to silver the snow around you. You shift slightly, and as your fingers brush the edge of your robe, you think of another crucial part of frontier sleep. The leather itself worked and softened by human hands until it felt almost alive. Tonight you turn your attention to the art and quiet magic of brain-tanned hides. You lift an imagined edge of the robe, feeling the way the leather would flex. Brain tanning was not glamorous work. It was labour-intensive, smelly, and often required hours of scraping, stretching, and smoking. But the results were astonishing. One well-known detail from indigenous communities who perfected the method is that hides tanned with natural oils remained supple, even in cold weather, unlike commercially processed hides that stiffened into rigid boards when temperatures dropped. That softness meant everything on nights like this. You flex your fingers against the imagined leather, now sensing how it would mould contour and fold without cracking. The process itself was ingenious. You picture a hide stretched on a frame scraped of flesh and membrane until it shone pale and clean in the sun. Then the tanning mixture derived from the brain of the animal would be passaged through every fibre. Smoke sealed it, later protecting it from moisture. These steps created a material that moved almost like cloth, but held heat, like something far thicker. As you shift in your nest, you can appreciate how much effort went into every inch of something you might take for granted in a warmer world. A curious detail comes to you, something travellers like to mention with a grin. Some swore they could tell who tanned a hide just by smelling it. A hide smoked over sagebrush smelled completely different from one smoked over cottonwood or willow, and in winter those scents lingered in the blankets, drifting upward as men slept. You imagine a faint aroma of sweet smoke and earth clinging to your robe, mingling with the pine-scented bedding beneath you. It becomes a kind of comfort familiar even when the cold tries its best to pry into your bones. You lift the edge of your imagined robe again and run your gloved thumb across the inner surface. Even though you cannot truly feel it, your mind supplies the texture, smooth, soft, almost suede-like. Frontier accounts describe brain-tanned hides as quiet. They did not rustle or creak the way factory-tanned hides did. When sleep is fragile, and every small movement risks letting out a precious pocket of warmth, quiet matters. These hides allowed a person to adjust their position without waking fully or shaking loose the hard-earned heat trapped inside. You adjust your body slightly, tucking the robe closer around your hips. The pine boughs beneath you give a low sigh and your breath rises in a slow ribbon of white. The thought crosses your mind that these hides were often used not only as blankets, but also as clothing. And in truth, the line between bedgear and clothing blurred in the mountains. A man might sleep wrapped in his coat, his leggings, his moccasins, every layer serving double duty. A thick piece of brain-tanned leather could serve as a blanket at night, and as a coat lining the next morning. As you shift again, another layer of memory comes forward. A fragment of lore rarely repeated, told by old trappers long after their mountain days were behind them. Some insisted that the sound of a well-tanned hide in winter was different from any other material they carried. They said it had a muted whisper when folded, almost like dry leaves brushed by a gentle breeze. Whether this was something real or just a trick of nostalgia is unclear, but you can nearly hear it now, that faint rustling, as you settle deeper into the robe. You take another slow breath and let your attention drift outward. The fire sends a shimmer over the leather's surface, creating soft highlights, like ripples across a pond. The world remains silent except for the occasional creak of trees shifting under their frozen burden. You close your eyes briefly and picture a mountain man doing exactly what you're doing now, pulling the hide tighter around himself. Maybe adjusting a corner so it would not flap open in the wind. Maybe curling a knee inward to warm a cold spot. These small adjustments could make the difference between a comfortable hour's doze and a miserable night of half sleep. You brush a hand along the hide once more, considering its craftsmanship. Contemporary researchers sometimes disagree on how long a single buffalo robe remained in usable condition. Some argue they lasted only a season or two before stiffening or tearing. Others claim that with proper smoking and maintenance they could endure for years. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, shaped by weather use and the skill of the tanner. You imagine the pride of someone who crafted a robe so well that it carried someone through multiple winters. Your fire crackles softly. The ember bed hums beneath the pine boughs. You adjust the robe and sense its warmth gathering in pockets, especially where it touches your chest and ribs. The hide seems to trap every bit of heat your body produces, reflecting it back slowly and steadily. You can imagine the sensation of thick fur brushing your chin if you pulled it close, the way a robe naturally formed a kind of hood when drawn up. You extend your legs slightly, feeling a mild glow from the ember bed beneath your heels. You pull the robe tighter. The snowpack around you glitters faintly, each crystal catching the firelight like scattered shards of glass. The effect is mesmerizing, and you find yourself staring at the shimmering surface as if it might reveal something deeper about the night. A rarely mentioned observation from frontier letters returns to you. Some men noted that brain-tanned leather seemed to warm more slowly than wool, but held warmth far longer. That slow build is what you sense now. Not a flash of heat, not a sudden rush, but a gradual blooming warmth that spreads outward in gentle waves. It gives your muscles time to adjust. It calms the shivers. It makes breathing easier. The robe shifts as you move your shoulder. You imagine the way it would flex, drape, and follow your contours. This is why these hides were treasured. They were not just materials. They were companions. They wrapped around you, shielded you, softened the harshness of the world. They carried the imprint of every journey, every campsite, every night of frost that did not manage to claim you. You tuck the edge beneath your thigh, sealing in a stubborn pocket of heat. The cold air brushes your cheek, reminding you that winter still rules everything beyond this small circle of firelight. But here under your robe you have a bubble of protection. And as you ease your head down onto your arm and let your eyes half close, you realize that the art of brain tanning was more than a technique. It was a legacy of knowledge, a gift passed down through generations of skilled hands, keeping wanderers alive in places where the cold showed no mercy. You breathe in deeply, and your imagined hide warms a little more. The night stretches on, but you face it with a soft, pliable shield shaped by expert hands long before you arrived. You shift slightly under your imagined hide, letting the warmth settle in slow pulses as the night deepens around you. The silence is thick now, a dense quiet broken only by the faint pops from the ember bed hidden beneath your layers. You feel cocooned, sheltered by your robe and the shallow walls of snow you shaped. But even with these preparations, the cold remains a constant presence. And in this vast frozen wilderness, warmth could sometimes come from a far less glamorous source, another human body. Tonight you explore the strange, reluctant partnership of sharing heat on nights brutally cold enough to make pride an afterthought. You sit up a little, imagining a second figure across the fire, another trapper or traveller wrapped in his own robe watching the flames with that glazed, exhausted stare common to people who have spent too many nights in the open. Written accounts from various expeditions quietly acknowledge that companionship during extreme cold was sometimes not about friendship at all, but simple necessity. When two exhausted men bedded down close together, their shared warmth could mean the difference between freezing stiff and waking sore but alive. No matter how tough a mountain man claimed to be, nature could humble anyone. You draw your robe tighter, picturing yourself scooting closer to your hypothetical campmate. It feels awkward even in imagination. And on the frontier, it often felt awkward in reality. Many of these men prided themselves on independence, on rugged solitude, on being self-sufficient to the point of stubbornness. Yet the cold cared nothing for ego. A practical observation recorded in several trapper journals notes that even the most solitary wanderers sometimes slept back to back with another person, when the temperature plunged low enough to bite through every layer they had. Back to back was common. Face to face was avoided for obvious reasons of dignity and mutual smell. You chuckle softly to yourself at that, the breath drifting up into the frigid air. You settle your weight against the pine boughs, imagining the presence of a companion tucked into his own bedding just inches away. There would have been no conversation at that point. Just grunts, rustles, maybe the brief exchange of complaints about the cold before both men sank into the kind of exhausted half-sleep that frontier life demanded. A peculiar and often overlooked bit of winter lore comes to mind. Some trappers insisted that sleeping near another person helped keep your boots from freezing because the collective body heat raised the temperature inside a shared shelter, just enough to prevent leather from turning rock hard by morning. Others laughed at that idea and said the boots froze anyway, no matter how many bodies crowded together. The truth probably varied night by night. You glance toward your imaginary companion's feet and picture the stiff boots lined up near the fire, their shapes rigid and unforgiving. You lie back again, considering the subtle discomfort of sleeping near another person in such tight quarters. The smell alone would have been a challenge. Smoke sweat, wet leather old hides, and the general perfume of someone who had not bathed in weeks. Yet when you strip away modern expectations, there is something very human about the instinct to huddle together when the world outside tries to freeze the life out of you. You let your body rest fully in your nest, the warmth rising from the ember bed. For a moment you imagine the other man shifting at your back, adjusting his robe, mumbling something unintelligible before settling again. The rhythm of another person's breathing would have been oddly soothing in a night like this. A reassurance that at least someone else remained alive and nearby. Opinions among modern researchers differ regarding how common these shared sleep arrangements truly were. Some believe they were routine in winter because survival dictated efficiency. Others argue they were used only in the most severe weather, pointing out that personal space was prized among frontier men. Primary documents do not offer a unified answer. Instead, they offer hints, glimpses, scattered remarks that suggest a practice born from practicality rather than preference. And you feel that practicality now, sensing how the cold pushes you toward any available warmth, even one that might otherwise feel uncomfortable. You tuck your robe closer around your hips, then around your shoulders. If you were really sharing heat tonight, you might tuck the side of your robe slightly under the other person's, creating a combined layer that held warmth better than two separate coverings. Small adjustments like that could make a surprising difference. You can picture one man muttering something irritable, while another shifts closer, both pretending not to notice the necessity of the moment. Your fire flickers, casting pale gold ripples across the snow. You hear the faint rustle of the boughs beneath you, and imagine your companion rolling slightly in his sleep. Even without physical contact, the presence of another warm body makes the space feel fuller, less vulnerable. The wilderness may be enormous and indifferent, but two people curled under hides, with a fire at their feet, carve a small sanctuary out of the darkness. Another unexpected detail rises from frontier conversations preserved in letters. Few men swore that their dreams grew calmer when they slept near someone, as if shared warmth softened the mind's edge. Others claimed the opposite, grumbling that the presence of another person made them restless. Dreams, after all, are shaped by comfort and discomfort alike. You wonder which type you would be tonight as you adjust your arm beneath your head. The cold settles heavier around the edges of your little shelter, pressing inward like a patient hand. But with the imagined warmth of a second sleeper nearby, you feel more shielded. The psychological comfort complements the physical benefit. You exhale slowly, watching your breath drift upward, illuminated faintly by the last glow of the fire. The night remains vast, but it no longer feels lonely. You allow yourself to sink fully into the nest once more, imagining the subtle rise and fall of breath behind you, the faint warmth of another presence, the shared determination to survive another frozen night in a land that offered beauty and brutality in equal measure. And as the ember bed hums beneath you, you grasp why mountain men, for all their pride and stubborn independence, sometimes set that pride aside when temperatures fell so low that survival itself demanded company. In this tiny pocket of winter, tucked beneath fir and pine, you feel the truth of it settling quietly beside you. You lie still for a moment longer, letting the imagined shape of another sleeper fade back into the darkness. The fire gives a small sigh as a coal collapses inward, casting a ripple of orange light across your camp. The air is brittle now, thin and cold enough that each breath feels like drawing in tiny shards of glass. In conditions like these, mountain men treated their tools not as accessories, but as lifelines. And one item stayed closer than anything else when the temperature plunged the rifle. Tonight you ease into the mindset of someone who slept with a weapon tucked against his body, not out of paranoia, but pure necessity. You sit up slowly, your robe sliding off one shoulder, and you picture the long familiar weight of a flintlock or percussion rifle resting beside you. Surviving field notes from several expeditions indicate that many frontiersmen kept their guns under their blankets or hides during winter nights, not to clutch them protectively, but simply to keep the metal from freezing solid. A frozen rifle could cost minutes in the morning, minutes you might not have if danger appeared. You reach to your side, now mimicking the way a hand would curl around cold iron, pulling it closer until the stock rests against your ribs. The cold instantly offers a reminder metal holds winter's bite far more fiercely than wood. Even touching your glove to the imagined barrel sends a prickling shock down your arm. You understand why trappers often tuck the barrel beneath their coat, letting their own body warmth keep it functional. It wasn't about heroics. It was maintenance. Basic, essential, stubborn maintenance that kept a man alive in a world that liked to break equipment as easily as it broke spirits. While you adjust the rifle's imaginary position, a slightly offbeat observation from frontier chatter trickles to mind. Some seasoned hunters claim they could tell the exact temperature outside by how quickly the metal frosted when exposed to the night air. If the barrel clouded instantly, the cold had reached a level best described as cruel. If it took a few breaths, conditions were still bad but survivable. You lift the imaginary rifle now, watching faint tendrils of your breath curl around the make-believe steel. Even the thought of frost forming that fast makes you tuck it back under your robe. You settle your body again, shifting the pine boughs beneath you. The needles rustle softly, and the ember bed releases a muted groan as a new cluster of heat rises. Your rifle rests between your chest and the debris bedding snug enough that it will not fall or tip. Mountain men often slept with one hand looped loosely around the stock, not gripping it hard, but maintaining contact so they could sense any movement. With predators, rival, trappers, or sudden attacks not entirely out of the question, staying connected to your main defensive tool offered both security and readiness. You tilt your head slightly and reflect on how the cold affected firearms in ways modern shooters might never consider. Powder became sluggish, primers hardened, lubricants stiffened. There were even whispers among late 19th century travellers that intense cold could cause a percussion cap to fracture if handled roughly. Not everyone agreed on this, and interpretations differ among historians who study early firearms technology, but the caution itself reveals how delicately men treated their weapons in deep winter. You test the idea in your mind now, imagining every motion slow, careful, precise. You curl your body slightly around the rifle, aligning yourself the way many slept, knees bent, elbows tucked, barrel angled downward along the length of your torso. This position protected both the gun and the sleeper. It prevented snow or drifting ash from settling into the firing mechanism. It also ensured that if something startled the camp at night, the weapon could be freed in a single motion. You try that motion now, lifting it slightly, then lowering it again. The fluidity of it feels natural, even if the object itself is only imagined. The fire sighs again, tossing a sliver of warmth across your face. The boulder behind you radiates a faint echo of stored heat, and for a moment the cold seems almost tolerant, as though it has accepted your claim to this little patch of earth. You keep your rifle tucked close, feeling the symbolic weight of it. This wasn't just a tool for hunting, it was insurance. It was reassurance. It was the frontier equivalent of locking your door at night. Your fingers brush the imagined stock, and you recall a detail that sounds almost humorous, but appears in multiple traveller journals. Men use their rifles as pillows more often than one might think, not for comfort, but because it kept the weapon from rolling away or being covered in snow. Resting your head on the stock also let you feel vibrations in the ground if something large moved nearby. The idea seems absurd until you try it in your imagination. You lower your head slowly, letting it rest on the sturdy wooden shape. Surprisingly, it feels stable. A faint crack sounds somewhere in the trees. You lift your eyes, half alert, half drowsy. On nights like this, any unusual noise could pull a sleeper halfway to waking. But after a moment, nothing follows. The forest settles again. You let the imagined rifle remain at your cheek the way an old woodsman might have done, ready but half asleep. As your breath drifts upward in soft clouds, you shift your thoughts toward how these weapons aged in harsh conditions. Old expedition records hint that barrels sometimes pitted from constant freezing and thawing. Stocks warped slightly if exposed to too much moisture. Yet men carried them faithfully, repairing them with improvised tools, tightening bands, oiling movements, with whatever animal fat they had left. Each rifle was as individual as its owner, shaped by weather, by use, by the small scars of daily survival. You tuck the robe around both yourself and the rifle again, sealing in a little extra warmth. The fire dimly illuminates the fur's rippling folds as you let your muscles relax. The presence of the weapon at your side feels oddly comforting now, as though you have adopted the habits of a long-gone mountain traveller without even noticing the transition. Another detail surfaces from your memory, something found in the margins of one trapper's old notebook. He wrote that on the coldest nights he thanked his rifle before he slept because it had fed him, defended him, and now warmed him. Whether this was sincerity or exhaustion, blended with superstition, cannot be clearly determined, but the sentiment holds a quiet charm. You glance at your imaginary rifle and almost feel tempted to whisper gratitude of your own. You shift once more, nestling deeper into your layered nest of pine and fir, the rifle snug against your ribs. The cold still circles your little camp like a patient animal, but inside your sheltered pocket of warmth, you feel ready for sleep, ready for whatever the night shapes around you. And as you close your eyes halfway, the presence of the rifle, silent and steady, reminds you of the strange intimacy between a person and the tools that kept them alive in the wild heart of the mountains. You lie with the rifle curled warmly beneath your robe, but another problem quickly edges into your mind. Metal might freeze, but so could the delicate materials meant to make that metal fire. In temperatures this brutal, even a well-kept weapon is only half a tool. Powder and caps, those tiny crucial ingredients of survival, were strangely sensitive to cold. You shift slightly on your pine boughs and imagine reaching into a pouch near your hip, checking the containers that hold your life in fine black grains. You draw your imagined powder horn close and tilt it in your hands. Powder responds to weather almost like a living thing. It hates damp, it clumps under frost, and it sulks into uselessness if left exposed for even a few minutes. Early explorers described this with quiet frustration, writing that gunpowder sometimes felt as fickle as the wind itself. You picture yourself loosening the stopper, carefully glancing at the firelight to be sure no stray spark can reach it. Then you seal it again, just as quickly tucking it beneath your coat the way a seasoned mountain man would. The cold seems to press in tighter around you as you consider the fragility of these materials. You touch the imagined pouch of percussion caps next to the tiny brass hats that made rifles fire with sharp efficiency once flintlocks faded from popularity. These little caps were just as vulnerable. They grew brittle, cracked, or refused to ignite if they spent too long in freezing air. One old frontier note hints that men sometimes carried their caps in the warmest place they could manage during winter nights, tucked inside a shirt or even under the armpit. The idea seems odd, almost humorous, but the necessity feels very real as you sit here in the cold, imagining the sting of metal kept too long outside. You shift your legs and rewrap your robe, letting the ember bed send another gentle pulse of warmth through your spine. The fire crackles softly, its flickers lighting the contours of your gear. In your mind you take up a small leather bag, the kind many trappers use to store spare wadding, spare flints and dry cloth. You pat it gently, checking for any hint of stiffness. If the contents froze, the bag would feel rigid, the leather crisp. You test it in your imagination now, letting your gloved fingers press against the invisible hide. It feels pliable, warm from your body heat, safe. A peculiar detail from scattered frontier reminiscences floats across your thoughts. Some trappers claimed they could smell dampness in powder, even before opening the horn. They said moisture had a scent, a sour whisper, that warned a man his next shot might miss fire. Whether this was skill guesswork or superstition remains uncertain, but the claim leaves a strangely vivid impression. You raise the horn again and imagine tilting it near your nose, trying to catch a trace of anything unusual. The cold presses harder against your cheeks and you pull the robe closer with a gentle tug. Powder and caps aren't things you think of as fragile until you're sleeping in a world like this, a world where frost forms inside clothing, where breath freezes at your beard, where a misplaced spark or a single damp cap can mean a missed shot at food or at a charging predator. The stakes were never abstract to these men. They were immediate, unforgiving, always present. You roll onto your side, slightly propping the imaginary powder horn beneath your ribs, warming it in the cradle of your body. This was a common trick among winter travellers. They kept powder inside their coats layered against skin, or pressed beneath a sleeping robe to keep it responsive. An offbeat recollection from one long-retired trapper mentions how he'd sometimes wake with a faint imprint of his powder horn on his stomach from keeping it tucked there all night. You smile at the image, imagining the discomfort mixed with necessity. Your fire pops sharply, reminding you of how dangerous sparks could be. Powder, even in this cold, remains eager to burn. You glance toward the flames, imagining how carefully a mountain man would arrange his gear so nothing flammable sat too near. Powder horns went under blankets. Caps went inside pockets. Cloth patches stayed in tins shut tight. Everything had its place, and that place was never beside the fire. You shift again, adjusting your mental layout of the camp as though arranging invisible objects around you. You let your head rest on your arm as you think about how winter affected firing mechanisms. Those early caps, so small and delicate, could become brittle enough to snap when handled. There is lingering discussion among firearm historians about whether certain cap mixtures were more prone to freezing than others. Some suggest that early production methods varied enough that one batch might endure cold beautifully, while another batch shattered at a touch. The uncertainty adds an odd tension to the thought of relying on them in weather like this. You ease your breathing, feeling your chest rise slowly beneath the robe. Even imagining these materials tucked against your body brings a sense of responsibility, a reminder that every tool had to be guarded with devotion. When a man slept in the mountains, he slept with his gear as though it were part of him. Powder horn under one-arm rifle against the torso cap sealed from frost knife within reach. You replicate the posture, now curling slightly to create a pocket of heat around the vital pieces. Another unexpected recollection surfaces from a faded old journal, a trapper describing how he sometimes warmed his caps in a mitten before loading his rifle at dawn. He wrote that the warmth woke them, a poetic exaggeration perhaps, but revealing a quiet ritual of coaxing frozen gear back into life. You picture yourself doing the same, rubbing a handful of tiny brass caps between your gloves, waiting until they feel the slightest bit pliable again. The cold shifts around you, a gentle swirl that rushes over the top of your robe. You tighten your shoulders and let the ember bed breathe its slow, steady heat upward. The night above remains immense and indifferent, but you have built a small island of warmth and readiness. Powder secure, caps protected, rifle warmed, everything tucked in its proper place. You draw the robe closer, feeling the imagined gear pressing softly against your side, and you understand how mountain men lived with quiet, constant vigilance. Even in sleep they had to preserve their tools against the night's bite. And as the firelight flickers across your shelter, you adjust your position once more, ready to drift into rest, knowing that the very spark of survival lies tucked warmly beneath your layers. You shift gently in your pine bough nest, the robe snug around your shoulders, the powder horn warmed beneath your arm. The night has grown teeth by now, cold enough that even the trees seem to creak in complaint. Your fire is low, just a soft ring of orange breathing at the centre of camp. Its heat is pleasant, but you can already feel it weakening. Flames rise, flames fall, and eventually flames fail. That is the nature of fire in deep winter. And so mountain men learned something clever, something that feels almost like a secret whispered by the land itself. Using heated stones as portable pockets of warmth. You sit up slowly, the robe sliding with a soft rasp. The ember bed beneath you glows faintly through the boughs, but you know its heat will not last forever. So you reach toward the fire pit, imagining the scattered stones that ring its edge. Using stones for heat is older than recorded history, a trick borrowed from many cultures long before these mountains were mapped. Old camp records hint that trappers and indigenous travellers alike relied on warmed rocks to stretch their comfort through the night. The method required patience, but its reward was warmth that lasted long after the flames had surrendered to darkness. You lean closer to the fire, feeling that subtle sting of heat on your cheek. Your gloved hand moves toward a medium-sized stone. You cannot truly touch it here, of course, but you picture its surface glowing faintly with retained warmth. The key was choosing the right ones. Smooth stones were prized. River stones could crack or even explode if they held hidden pockets of moisture. Many winter wanderers learned that the hard way. There is an amusing and slightly alarming anecdote tucked in one trapper's notebook about a rock that shattered like a rifle shot, sending shards through a blanket, and startling him so badly he nearly rolled into the fire. You smile softly into the cold feeling your breath rise as a pale twist of smoke. You choose your imaginary stone carefully, not too large, not too thin, something with weight, something that can absorb and release heat like a slow-controlled exhale. You imagine reaching into the fire with a forked stick, nudging the stone closer to the glowing coals. Sparks dance for a moment, crackling upward like tiny shooting stars. As the stone heats, you shift your attention to another memory preserved in oral stories passed down among frontier families. Travellers sometimes tucked heated stones into boots before sleep easing sore feet and drying damp linings. Others wrapped stones in spare bits of hide and held them against their stomachs to keep their core temperature steady. The descriptions are vivid, a sigh of relief, a loosening of muscles, a fleeting sense that winter had granted a temporary truce. You kneel beside the fire, imagining the stone now warm enough to use. You raise it with your forked stick, lifting it away from the coals. Even from here, you can picture the shimmering waves of heat radiating from its surface. You place it on a patch of snow, letting the outer layer cool just enough that it will not scorch your robe. Steam rises in faint curtains as the snow hisses beneath it. The sound is soft, comforting, almost like a pot simmering on a faraway hearth. You pick the stone up with the edges of your robe, creating a thick fold to protect your hands. The warmth seeps instantly into the fur-covered leather, travelling along your arms and into your chest. This is the kind of heat that does not burn or blaze. It settles, seeps, and lingers. You ease yourself back into the bedding, holding the stone close to your middle. The warmth blooms through your torso in slow, steady pulses. Your shoulders drop. Your breath thickens. You feel your body instinctively relax. Another intriguing detail surfaces, something mentioned in scattered field notes from long-forgotten expeditions. Some winter travellers, when faced with nights far colder than expected, heated 2 stones instead of 1. They placed one at their core and the other near their feet. This created a gentle flow of warmth along the length of the body, a curiously effective system that acted almost like a primitive radiant heater. You shift your legs now, imagining one stone resting near your calves, slowly warming the thick leather of your boots. You adjust the robe so its edges form a loose pocket around the stone. The warmth gathers beneath the hide and spreads like honey poured across cold wood. Your muscles respond immediately. It is astonishing how deeply a small rise in temperature can settle into sore joints. You stretch your toes inside your boots, feeling the faint echo of warmth travelling toward them. Another stone sits near the fire pit in your imagination, and you picture a mountain man heating it as well. Handling hot stones required care. Too hot and they could singe hides. Too cold and the effect was weak. A certain finesse came with experience, a kind of intuition. Some campers claim they could judge a stone's heat by listening to its voice as it touched snow. A long hiss meant it was ready for insulation. No hiss meant it wasn't hot enough. Whether this was vivid imagination or real skill is not fully understood, but the image lingers with a kind of poetry. You rest your head on your arm again, letting the stone warm your belly. Slowly your teeth stop their faint chatter. Your toes curl with returning comfort. Even the cold air brushing your face feels less malicious. You breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of pine and faint smoke. As you shift slightly, you remember a curious inconsistency noted in old journals. Some writers claimed heated stone stayed warm for hours. Others insisted the heat dissipated within minutes. The difference might have come from the stone type, the fire strength, or simple exhaustion influencing perception. Scholars examining these competing accounts point out that natural materials vary widely, making the truth almost impossible to pin down. You find that uncertainty almost comforting. Winter does not offer certainties. only approximations, guesses, and habits shaped through trial and error. You slide the stone lower toward your abdomen, feeling the warmth soak further into your core. The ember bed beneath you adds its own gentle heat, and together the two create a cocoon of comfort that would never have existed without such careful preparation. You sense how deeply these tricks mattered. They shaped survival, yes, but they also shaped morale. To hold warmth against your body in this frozen world was to feel even briefly human again. You tuck the stone into a fold of your robe, letting it rest securely. The fire flickers weakly, but the stone glowing through cloth makes its own small flame beneath your blanket. You settle back onto the pine boughs, letting the warmth travel slowly outward, soft and persistent. In the coldest nights, when fire burned low and the wind prowled through branches like a restless spirit, a heated stone could keep a man tethered to life. That warmth, tiny though it may be, could guide him gently into sleep instead of shivering misery. You let your body sink into the bedding, the stone radiating its warmth like a heartbeat against your ribs, and for a moment winter itself seems to pause, waiting, watching, but unable to reach you through your careful glowing shield. You lie very still for a moment, letting the warmth of the stone seep deeper into your belly. The ember bed exhales its dull glow beneath the pine boughs, and your robe feels heavy and reassuring. But even with a fire, even with stones, even with layers of hide, the cold can still claw its way into your bones if you remain too exposed. That is why mountain men sometimes turn to one of the simplest, most instinctive shelters available. When the wind threatened to strip heat from their bodies, a snow cave carved quickly into a drift. Tonight you imagine building one yourself, letting the land become the walls around you. You peel back a corner of your robe and rise slowly, careful not to disturb the bedding too much. The night air seizes your face instantly, sharp and dry. You scan your surroundings and look toward the drift you studied earlier, the one that curls against the boulder like a frozen wave. You approach it, boots crunching softly across the crusted surface. Snow can be a hunter's enemy, but it can also be an ally. Some of the earliest trapper journals describe using snowbanks as insulation when temperatures sank into wicked lows. The snow's density combined with trapped air created pockets significantly warmer than the howling world outside. You crouch beside the drift and press your gloved hand into it. The snow here feels compact, layered by repeated storms, firm enough to hold a shallow chamber. You sweep your arm across the front, testing the hardness. The surface gives slightly, then resists a perfect balance for hollowing without collapse. One small understated note found in a trader's winter ledger mentions how he learned to carve shelters by watching foxes disappear into snow tunnels. He wrote about it without ceremony, but the image stays vivid, an animal vanishing into cold and warmth at once. You take a breath and begin shaping your imaginary cave. Your hands move in steady arcs, scooping out loose powder, pushing aside the denser layers, forming a small entrance, barely large enough for you to crawl through. The motion feels meditative, even though you are only imagining it. Snow tumbles in clumps at your knees, and the sound is muted like soft cloth falling. You widen the opening carefully, then begin to carve upward, rounding the ceiling in a smooth dome. A little-known observation preserved in a few frontier letters notes that rounded ceilings prevented dripping and minimized collapse, something travelers learned through trial, error, and the occasional unpleasant surprise. You tuck that knowledge into your movements, now shaping the cave as though your fingers understand the physics instinctively. The deeper you dig, the quieter the world becomes. Snow muffles sound with astonishing efficiency. When you imagine crawling inside, the wind's voice softens as if someone closed a heavy door between you and the night. That instant hush is startling the first time you experience it. Many winter wanderers wrote that the sudden silence inside a snow cave felt almost sacred, like stepping into a natural chapel carved entirely by winter. You picture yourself stepping back out of the hollow, momentarily examining the structure. It needs stability, so you smooth the outer walls with firm, even strokes. The wind glides across them without catching, without tugging. The moonlight glimmers faintly on the surface, making the whole drift shine like a sleeping creature. As you kneel to shape the interior floor, another piece of frontier memory enters your thoughts. A few old-timers recall tucking evergreen branches inside snow caverns to keep their bodies from direct contact with the ice. They describe the interior as unexpectedly warm, not cozy by any normal measure, but noticeably more forgiving than the bitter air outside. That image guides your hands now as you imagine layering fir boughs across the floor of the hollow, weaving them into a soft, fragrant mattress. You crawl inside for the first time in your mind, feeling the ceiling curve above you like the inside of a great white shell. The air tastes different here, slightly damp, slightly earthy. Your breath no longer flies away in wisps. Instead, it lingers and warms a small space. You stretch a hand toward the entrance and see the faint glow of your dying fire spilling across the snow outside. Everything else feels muted, snug, protected. There is an intriguing uncertainty among scholars studying wilderness survival diaries about how effective these snow chambers truly were. Some believe they provided remarkable insulation, reducing the cold by many degrees. Others argue that the warmth described in the journals was exaggerated by exhausted men desperate for comfort. Without precise measurements, the real temperature inside remains a quiet puzzle. But sitting here now in your imagination, the cave feels warmer than open air, and that is good enough for survival. You settle your body deeper into the imaginary space, pressing your back against the curved wall. It yields slightly but holds. The weight of snow above you feels strangely reassuring, not oppressive. Snow shelters were never intended for luxury. They were intended to keep death at bay. And as you breathe gently, your own warmth begins to build, creating a pocket of livable air in an otherwise unlivable night. You curl your legs toward your chest, drawing your robe tighter. The walls of the cave reflect your warmth back at you, soft and subtle. The pine boughs beneath you create a barrier between your body and the frozen layers underfoot. You can almost feel the scent of resin rising faintly from them, mixing with the muted cold inside the hollow. As you rest inside the drift, you imagine the entrance blocked by your pack, or by a pile of spare branches, leaving only a small gap for ventilation. Several mountain travellers cautioned against sealing snow shelters completely. A tiny airflow was essential to prevent suffocation. You picture yourself adjusting the opening, now making it small but safe. The quiet inside this space feels ancient. Your heartbeat seems louder, your breath steadier. Outside, the night continues its restless, wandering wind roaming through branches and frost, gathering on the boulder where you made your camp. But in here, the storm of cold cannot quite touch you. You ease your body into a position that suits the narrow space the robe wrapped around you like a cocoon. The snow cave cradles you, its rounded walls shaped by your own hands. You close your eyes briefly and feel the temperature difference faint, yes, but unmistakable. Enough to matter, enough to keep you warm enough to sleep. Snow may be harsh, but in the right shape it becomes shelter. And tonight, inside this imagined hollow of ice and silence, you understand why winter travellers trusted it with their lives. You rest for another quiet moment inside your imagined snow cave, feeling the faint warmth swirling around your body, the walls curving close like the inside of a hollowed pearl. But eventually you shift, imagining yourself crawling back out into the open air. The cold immediately reaches for you, brushing your cheeks with a sharpness that feels almost personal. Your fire has dwindled to a soft halo of orange, and your nest of pine boughs waits nearby like a familiar bed. Still, as you glance around the dark clearing, your thoughts drift toward a different kind of shelter. One mountain men sometimes used when fortune aligned the rough, hastily built structures near winter trading posts or seasonal quarters. You imagine stepping away from your little camp and into the memory of a log cabin standing crooked in the snow. Not a comfortable cabin by any modern sense, just a crude square of hand-cut logs chinked with mud that cracked in the cold roof, sagging under a thick smothering of frost. but compared to sleeping directly beneath a star-punched sky, such a structure felt like luxury. Letters from the fur trade era mention how these winter posts were scattered across key river valleys, built fast and used even faster. Some were hardly more than oversized sheds, but they provided walls, a roof, and a fire that didn't vanish in the wind. You step closer to the imagined cabin door. The boards creak when you push them aside. Inside, the air feels warmer, though only by a small margin. The temperature might still sink below freezing, but the absence of wind makes all the difference. A few surviving ledgers from supply depots describe these shelters as habitably cold, which is a phrase that seems both practical and bleak. Even now in your mind, you feel your breath cloud inside the room, hanging for a moment before drifting upward toward rafters crusted in frost. You picture a handful of mountain men already inside, some perched on crates, others leaning near the fire pit dug into the centre of the dirt floor. A pot hangs over the faint flames, steaming with whatever scraps they were able to throw together. The smell is a mixture of smoke, grease, and unwashed wool, the unofficial perfume of winter quarters. You lower yourself onto an imagined bench made of 2 logs, feeling the rough bark press into your palms. It's stiff, uneven, and yet it feels like decadence compared to frozen ground. While you sit, a peculiar fragment of cabin lore drifts back to you. Some trappers swore that sleeping in a crowded winter post was worse than sleeping outside, not because of cold, but because of the symphony of snores, coughs, shifting bodies, and the unmistakable aroma of too many men crammed into too little space. Others argued that the companionship made the nights shorter and the mornings easier. The difference in opinion appears again and again in frontier correspondence, painting winter quarters as both refuge and irritant. You stand and walk to the imaginary hearth, feeling its inconsistent warmth on your hands. The logs below smoulder unevenly, giving off a reddish glow. You imagine feeding a stick into the coals and watching sparks climb lazily upward. The crackle seems louder indoors, bouncing off the crude log walls. Your skin prickles with a prickly warmth, not enough to relax completely, but enough to let your shoulders soften. As you observe the room, your mind drifts to how these structures came together. Archival records from one fur company describe building winter huts in frantic bursts of effort when the season turned too quickly. Men cut trees, dragged them across snow, and stacked them with the kind of sloppy craftsmanship born not from carelessness but from urgency. The final result might lean, might gape, might smoke badly when the wind shifted, but it worked. It shielded life from wind and darkness. You sit back down on the log bench, imagining the others preparing for bed. They unfurl blankets patched so many times they look like faded quilts of mismatched hides. Some place their bedding in corners where the wind doesn't reach. Others choose the space near the fire, knowing it will burn low before dawn. You choose a spot along a wall where a small gap between logs lets a sliver of moonlight creep through. It becomes your little lantern. Another faint odd recollection from oral stories surfaces. Men complained that winter huts always smelled like damp wood and old smoke, no matter how many times you tried to air them out. Some even said the scent lingered on their clothing for months after leaving. Whether this is exaggeration or simple winter truth is uncertain, but the image fits perfectly with the rough interior you're imagining. You spread your pretend bedding near the wall, layering pine needles beneath if you have any left, then pulling your robe over your body. The earth beneath is cold but not biting. The still air lets you relax without bracing against constant gusts. You stretch out slowly, listening to the muted murmurs of the others settling in. A cough from one corner, a muttered prayer from another, a gentle shifting of blankets. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about the real comfort level of these winter posts. Some describe them as reasonably warm, especially when lined with animal skins. Others argue that the gaps in the log walls leaked cold relentlessly, making the interior little better than the outdoors. The disagreement stems from incomplete descriptions and widely varying construction styles. But as you lie here, sensing warmth radiating unevenly from the dying fire, it feels entirely believable that these huts offered mixed blessings. You curl into your robe, adjusting your position so your back presses lightly against the log wall. The wood radiates a faint chill, but your body heat gradually counters it. You imagine feeling the vibrations of the wind moving across the exterior, a subtle reminder that beyond these walls lies a cold wilderness vast enough to swallow anyone careless enough to underestimate it. The fire inside the hut dims further. Shadows lengthen across the floor. Someone near the hearth shifts, pulling his blanket higher. Another lets out a long exhale that fogs in the air before vanishing. The atmosphere becomes heavy with a quiet, shared fatigue, the kind that settles into groups spending weeks together in close quarters. You let your breathing match the chilly rhythm of the room. Slow, deep, measured. The wall behind you feels strangely comforting now, not warm but solid. A shield against the open night. A reminder that even makeshift shelter can change the way cold touches a body. You close your eyes halfway and listen to the room breathing with you. A rough shelter, yes. A drafty one, yes. But still a refuge. Still a pause from the relentless cold. And as the fire's last glow fades, you understand why winter quarters mattered so deeply. They didn't promise comfort. They promised survival, and sometimes in the wilderness that was enough to let a weary traveller drift into sleep. You lie in your rough cabin, bedding for a few moments longer, letting the dim memory of shelter drift through your thoughts. But the forest clearing calls you back. Your mind returns to the open air, the pine boughs, the ember bed, breathing beneath your layers. When you imagine stepping outside again, the cold wraps around you, instantly sharp and intimate, like icy fingers, testing every exposed inch of your skin. And with that cold comes another truth of frontier nights, the scents that clung to bedding, clothing, and everything else. Grease smoke, leather unwashed, wool pine sap, a whole symphony of winter odours that shaped how mountain men experienced their nights. You settle back into your makeshift nest this time, paying attention to the smells that would surround you. Even in imagination you can sense them, the faint tang of wood smoke caught in your clothing, the earthy musk of your buffalo robe, the resinous note of crushed pine needles beneath your spine. These scents weren't minor details. They were the ever-present companions of anyone who spent months in the high country. Letters preserved from fur trade clerks mention that trappers often carried the smell of smoke so thoroughly in their clothes that even rain couldn't wash it out. You take another slow breath. The scent of burning grease from your earlier meal seems to linger in the air, mixing with the cold. Grease was everywhere in a trapper's life. Rendered fat-coated cookware, waterproofed leather, protected metal, and sometimes even served as a makeshift lamp. When it soaked into blankets or hides, the smell grew strong and persistent, part unpleasant, part reassuring. You try to imagine sleeping wrapped in something that always carried that heavy aroma. Surprisingly, you find that the thought doesn't repel you. In this cold, any smell tied to warmth or nourishment becomes a kind of comfort. As you shift your body to settle more deeply into the bedding, a small but distinctive detail flashes through your memory, an old trapper's recollection, describing how he once fell asleep on a bed made mostly of smoked animal hides. He wrote that the scent was so strong he dreamed of campfires the entire night. It's such an oddly charming fragment of memory that you find yourself smiling into the darkness. Dreams shaped by smoke and grease, the trademark perfume of frontier sleep. You inhale again, and the air carries not only smoke but a faint animal note from your robe. Hides rarely smelled neutral. Even after scraping, stretching, and smoking, they retain traces of the creatures they came from. One rugged diary entry mentions that on certain wet nights, the scent of a robe intensified until the writer joked that his blanket seemed ready to graze. You can almost sense what he meant. The robe around your shoulders feels warm, heavy, and alive with faint residual musk. Your attention drifts next to the odour of the pine boughs beneath you. The sharp, clean scent of crushed needles mixes with something deeper, the damp, cool aroma of the forest floor. If you shift your weight, you can imagine that fragrance rising from the bedding. It's perhaps the only smell here that feels purely pleasant, something you would still recognise today as refreshing. Pine acted as both mattress and air freshener in the mountain world, helping disguise less appealing smells that no winter traveller could escape. While these scents envelop you, a larger thought settles in. The frontier didn't smell sterile. It smelled lived in, layered, vibrant, with the mingled aromas of survival. Museum collections of preserved winter gear sometimes retain faint traces of smoke or tallow, even after centuries, hinting at how deeply those smells permeated daily life. It's a quiet kind of evidence, subtle yet powerful, that tells you more about mountain men's world than a dozen written pages might. You exhale slowly, letting the air fog around your face. The evening deepens and you shift slightly to ease a cold patch near your hip. As you move, your robe releases another small wave of scent leather warmed by your body heat. You realize that warmth amplifies all smells in the wild. Gear that seemed faintly scented during the day grew stronger when wrapped around you at night. Smoke clung to everything, blankets, shirts, moccasins, even hair. Men joked bitterly that if a wolf didn't smell them coming, it was because the wind had frozen in place. As the scents circle around you, a wider debate flickers into your thoughts. Specialists studying daily frontier life disagree on whether trappers eventually grew insensitive to strong odours, or if the smells continued to bother them but simply couldn't be helped. Some argue the human nose adapts quickly. Others point out that journal entries mention unpleasant aromas often enough to suggest the annoyance never fully vanished. The records don't align neatly, leaving the real level of tolerance a puzzle lost somewhere between pragmatism and misery. You shift again, tugging the robe closer to mute a thin draft brushing your ankle. The movement stirs the bedding, sending another little swirl of scent upward. You imagine the smell of smoke from your fire clinging to the inside of your robe, mingling with your own sweat, mixing into something wholly unique to the life you're living right now. It feels almost intimate, like a fingerprint of your existence in this wild night. In the stillness, you become aware of how profoundly smell shaped a mountain man's world. Without artificial fragrances, detergents, or sealed packaging, everything bore a raw, natural scent. Your clothing smelled of earth and hide. Your hands smelled faintly of metal and grease. Your bedding smelled like pine sap and smoke. Even the cold itself had a smell, crisp, sharp, metallic, almost like the tang of ice on iron. Travellers from the era often described winter air as clean enough to sting. You lift your head slightly, sniffing the air again. The cold cuts into your nostrils, clearing them with that unmistakable icy burn. But beneath the cold, the other smells assert themselves again. Pine, smoke, hide, grease. A layered tapestry of winter wilderness. These aromas would have coated every night of a trapper's life, lingering on his gear for months, drifting into his clothing even after moving on to different landscapes. You lower your head back onto your arm, letting the scents surround you, letting them shape the atmosphere of your imagined camp. Smell is memory, and in the mountains it was also reassurance. A smoky robe meant warmth. A pine-scented bed meant insulation. A greasy pot meant a meal had been eaten. A faint animal musk meant a hide was thick enough to shield you from cold. The fire outside your bedding hisses faintly as another coal settles. A small curl of aromatic smoke drifts your way, weaving gently through the night. You inhale it, letting it settle deep into your chest. Somehow it makes the cold feel less predatory, more like a familiar environment shaped by recognizable signals. And as you tuck the robe around your shoulders and feel yourself sinking deeper into warmth, you realize the scents of this wilderness are not distractions. They're part of the landscape as vital to the experience of survival as the fire at your feet or the fur against your skin. Little by little, wrapped in smoke pine leather and winter air, you let yourself drift further towards sleep, held not only by warmth, but by the layered fragrance of a world lived close to the earth. You remain curled beneath your robe, the sense of pine and smoke still lingering in the air, when another awareness slowly presses forward, the danger of cold biting into skin that has lost its feeling. Frostbite was not just an inconvenience for the old mountain men. It was a constant shadow at their heels, a risk that shaped night routines in ways subtle and instinctive. As you shift your weight in your nest of boughs, you begin to sense just how vigilant a sleeper had to be when temperatures dropped below the limits of comfort. You draw your robe closer and adjust the imaginary heated stone at your side. Your hands brush your cheeks, and you imagine the faint numbness that always arrived before expected. Writings by early observers mention that seasoned winter travellers checked their extremities repeatedly while bedding down even half asleep because losing sensation was the first whisper of something far worse. You mimic the motion, now pulling your gloves against your nose and ears, testing the warmth, ensuring no spot has grown dangerously cold. When you shift your legs beneath the robe, you recall a faintly odd detail passed down through frontier storytellers. Some men swore that a tingling sensation in the toes was a kind of blessing proof that the cold had not yet stolen them. Others claimed tingling was merely the last warning before numbness set in. No two accounts agree perfectly, and the uncertainty only deepens your appreciation for how carefully these travellers monitored their bodies. You flex your toes inside your imagined boots, feeling the faint imagined pressure of wool and hide pressing back. You inhale and the air feels sharp against your throat. Even with your shelter, it is easy to picture breath freezing in the corners of your hood, forming little crystals that brush the side of your mouth. Material evidence uncovered by researchers hints that some winter garments from the period contain tiny mineral deposits, likely remnants of repeated thawing and refreezing of breath along collars and hoods. That image alone makes you pull your imagined robe higher around your neck, sealing in warm air before letting another exhale slip out. You adjust your body to ease a developing cold spot along your hip. This movement feels subtle, but frontier accounts describe it as vital. A sleeper who grew too still risked allowing one part of the body to stiffen or freeze, while the rest remained warm. So you imagine yourself shifting and adjusting every so often, moving just enough to keep blood flowing without breaking the fragile comfort you've built. While you settle back down, a small recollection from wilderness veteran surfaces. They warned that frostbite often began silently, especially when wind snaked into a shelter. The sensation was not dramatic. It was quiet, a slow, cooling a dim fading of feeling. Some of these old accounts describe men waking to fingers stiffened like wood, or cheeks that felt coated in wax. The descriptions are unsettling, yet strangely matter-of-fact, as though frostbite was simply part of the winter landscape. You slide your hand under your robe and warm your fingers against your side. The warmth spreads slowly, and you picture how mountain men must have performed this same motion thousands of times throughout the winter. Not theatrically, not in panic, just steady maintenance. Your body was a tool, and tools needed tending. As you lie still, another layer of memory folds into your thoughts. Some trappers slept with small pouches of tallow or softened fat tucked inside their clothing. They used the grease to massage their hands, feet and ears during cold spells, believing it helped stave off the deeper chill. Whether the effect was more psychological than practical remains uncertain, but the practice appears often enough in scattered descriptions to make you imagine rubbing a little warmth into your fingers now, as though smoothing away invisible stiffness. The cold hums around you, a faint vibration in the night air. Your fire has dimmed to a low glow, its warmth barely touching the edges of your shelter. You turn your head and listen to the silence. The world outside your little nest feels vast and merciless. In this moment you understand why mountain men guarded their limbs so carefully. A lost toe, a frozen fingertip, small injuries by appearance could ruin the delicate balance of survival. You imagine the sting of returning warmth if you pressed a half-numb hand near the coals, that painful sensation described in several accounts as like needles waking in the flesh. As you pull your robe tighter again, you picture the subtle rituals carried out every night. Checking fingertips, flexing ankles, tucking ears under cloth, shielding the nose from freezing air. These routines shaped winter sleep as much as fire or bedding. Analysts reviewing frontier journals propose different interpretations of how common severe frostbite actually was. Some believe it plagued a large percentage of winter travellers, while others think that seasoned men developed near instinctive habits that prevented the worst outcomes. The truth may lie somewhere between these viewpoints. You shift again, rolling onto your side, pressing your cheek briefly into the warmth of your arm. You imagine your skin steaming faintly where it meets the robe, the cold air licking at the edges, but failing to penetrate the centre of your shelter. That fragile warmth becomes something you have to nurture, feed and defend, a living thing. You gently flex your fingers once more, feeling blood move outward. Then you curl your toes, drawing them closer to the core heat trapped beneath your robe. The warmth returns slowly, like a timid visitor approaching a doorway. It settles, growing more certain, and the numbness recedes. Night hangs heavy around you, but your body remains watchful. Every few moments you adjust your position. Rub your fingertips. Press your thigh against your calves for warmth. Tuck your chin deeper into the robe. These quiet movements become a kind of rhythm, an instinctive dance with the cold one that mountain men performed again and again until it fused with their sleep. You exhale softly and feel the heat rising from your own breath, warming the small world beneath your hood. Frostbite stalks the edges of the night, but you keep it at bay with movement vigilance and the small rituals that travellers before you learned through long hard winters. Wrapped in fur and pine and the faint glow of your ember bed, you settle once more, determined to outlast the cold. You curl deeper into your bedding, listening to the faint settling of snow around your shelter, when another truth stirs in your thoughts. People were not always the only warm bodies on a frozen night. Out here, where temperatures gnawed at flesh and breath, hung like foggy ghosts, animals sometimes became unwilling or welcome companions. The old mountain men understood this better than most, and as you shift your weight on the pine boughs, you can almost picture another living creature settling nearby, offering warmth without a word. You sit up slightly, drawing your robe around your shoulders, and imagine the gentle shuffle of a dog circling a spot near your side. Documents from the era quietly indicate that some trappers preferred travelling with dogs not only for hauling or guarding, but for warmth during bitter nights. Dogs would curl close, pressed between blankets, or wedged against a man's back, both creature and person benefiting from the exchange. You can almost feel a warm, steady presence leaning lightly against your hip. You adjust your bedding, creating a small hollow, as though making room for such a companion. A faintly unusual recollection from frontier storytelling mentions a mule that once pushed its nose under a trapper's blankets during a dangerous cold snap. The story is passed along with amused disbelief, yet it carries that ring of truth that only hardship can forge. Animals sensed cold more acutely than humans at times, and when temperatures plummeted they sought warmth, wherever they could find it, even from the people who relied on them. You stretch out your legs and listen to the night again. Imagine a dog settling its head on your ankle, or a horse standing close enough that its body heat presses through the air in soft waves. The warmth from a large animal is unmistakable. It radiates like a low-burning stove. Some wilderness accounts mention sleeping near a tethered horse, letting the animal's great mass create a shield against the worst of the wind. You picture leaning your shoulder back, resting it against a flank that moves in quiet, rhythmic breaths. As you shift your arms beneath your robe, a pale curl of your breath drifts close to your face. You turn your head and look toward the imagined animal. Its fur might smell of frost hay or old leather tack. A dog would carry a scent of wet earth and smoke. A horse or mule would loom like a living furnace, exhaling warm clouds that merge with your own. You settle back down, letting your imagined companion's presence fill the gap beside you. While you rest, a quieter detail slides into your awareness. Some trappers tuck their hands into the thick neck ruff of a dog while sleeping, letting the animal's body heat keep their fingers pliable. The idea feels intimate, almost tender, yet entirely practical. Herein the cold practicality overrides pride. You imagine doing the same, sliding your gloved hand near a warm patch of fur until the stiff ache in your fingers melts away. You turn slightly to the side, feeling the pine boughs creak beneath you. The fire crackles softly out in the open, but much of your warmth now comes from this imagined animal curled against your frame. You understand in a visceral way why companionship with animals held such weight in frontier life. These creatures were not just helpers, they were survival partners. They gave warning of predators, hauled loads, found trails, and on nights like this provided warmth no blanket could mimic. You let your eyes half close, sensing the soothing rise and fall of the creature's breath. In the hush of this imagined moment, another piece of wilderness memory returns. One traveller noted that horses in deep winter would sometimes lean their heads against a sleeping man's shoulder, as if seeking shared comfort. Whether this was affection or instinct remains an open question among those who study animal behaviour on the frontier, but the image is soft enough to settle warmly into your mind. A cold gust brushes the tip of your nose, but the presence beside you steadies the chill. You imagine burying your face slightly into the fur at your companion's neck, the way a tired hunter might after a day of trudging through snow and ice. The heat there would be rich and steady like embers beneath a thick layer of ash. Your breathing sinks with the animals for a few moments, slow and deep. You shift again, pulling your robe higher. The creature beside you adjusts as well, curling its legs beneath its body, forming a compact bundle of warmth. The shared nest feels more secure now, a small pocket of life resisting the cold. Analysts who sift through frontier diaries sometimes reach contrasting conclusions about how common this behaviour truly was. Some believe these warm exchanges were nightly rituals, others think they were used only in the worst extremes. The truth may be woven somewhere between need and opportunity. You run your gloved hand gently along the imagined creature's back. Beneath the fur you feel heat pooling, radiating outward in subtle waves. It seeps through your robe, through your weary muscles, deep into your ribs. The warm presence softens the tension you didn't realize you'd been holding. You breathe easier, your heartbeat quiets. The night continues its slow drift overhead, vast and sharp. But here, tucked against a living body, the cold loses some of its bite. This warmth, humble and wordless, becomes a lifeline, a reminder that survival in the mountains was rarely a solitary triumph. It was shared with nature, with instinct, and sometimes with animals whose simple companionship could keep a human alive until morning. You settle your head against your arm and let the imagined weight of your animal companion lean gently into you. The pine bedding rustles softly. The ember bed glows faintly beneath the boughs, and the night, icy and immense, recedes just a little farther from your fragile circle of heat. Wrapped in fur breath and the soft presence beside you, you let yourself drift again towards sleep, warmed by a bond older than recorded memory. You lie quietly in your nest, the warmth of your imagined animal companion fading as it wanders off into the snowy dark. The ember bed still breathes a soft glow beneath the pine boughs, but the cold is rising again, sliding in from every direction. As you shift slightly under your robe, a new truth settles. And sometimes in winter camps, clothing did not dry by morning, because it never had a chance to dry at all. And mountain men often chose to sleep in their wet clothes anyway, a choice that feels unthinkable, until you feel the cold edge of this imaginary night press against your skin. You push yourself upright slowly, feeling the pine needles sigh beneath you. Your coat, if truly soaked, would cling to you like stiff, icy parchment. Accounts from the period occasionally mention how a trapper might fall into a creek while breaking ice, or cross a stream that appeared shallow, but swallowed his boots to the knee. By nightfall, the soaked garments would freeze solid if left outside the blankets, and so strange as it sounds, many men crawled into their bedding, with wet clothing still on, hoping body heat would dry the fabric gradually, rather than let it harden into useless boards. You ease your hands down along your imagined trousers. The sensation of damp cloth becomes vivid in your mind, cold, heavy, stubborn. A faint and rather odd recollection survives in wilderness reminiscences. One trapper joked that he could tell who had fallen into a creek by the crackle of frozen pant legs when they walked into camp. It is a humorous picture until you imagine trying to sleep in something that's stiff. Your mind instinctively recoils, yet you begin to understand why wearing the wet clothes inside a fur robe made more sense. The cold outdoors was merciless. Dampness inside your bedding, while unpleasant, could at least be warmed. You lower your head and tug your robe tighter around your chest. As you imagine damp fabric touching your skin, you shiver. The water would still heat relentlessly, pulling warmth from every part of the body it touched. The old winter travellers insisted, however, that drying garments overnight with body heat prevented morning misery. Some described waking to find their shirts steaming faintly inside their blankets, a sight that must have felt surreal yet relieving. You picture it now, lifting a robe at dawn and seeing vapour drift upward like smoke. You look toward your dying fire, imagining its flicker casting pale light through the rising mist. The cold wind slips past your cheek, and the thought of sleeping in wet clothes feels borderline torturous. But as you settle into your bedding again, you consider another piece of winter wisdom mentioned in rough handwritten journals. A few travellers believed that removing wet clothes exposed the skin too sharply to the air, creating a more dangerous chill. They preferred the steady, miserable warmth of drying fabric to the bite of icy air on bare skin. You feel the pine boughs shift as you tuck your legs toward your chest. Damp pant legs cling to your mind's eye like cold vines. You breathe slowly, letting your breath thicken into the air. You imagine the discomfort, the unpleasant cold spreading from thighs to knees, from sleeves to wrists. Yet you also imagine the gradual shift as warmth builds, as the moisture begins to retreat under your robe. That slow, stubborn drying process shaped countless winter nights. Another nugget of frontier memory presses forward. One mountain wanderer described how he would periodically lift sections of his robe to readjust his steam-laden clothing, careful not to let cold gusts in. He said it felt like tending a walking smokehouse. Whether his phrasing was humour or literal observation cannot be firmly established, but the imagery resonates in this cold clearing. You adjust your posture again, allowing imaginary steam to escape gently from your robe's folds. The ember bed hums beneath your bows, adding a faint upward heat that helps the drying. You stretch your toes inside your boots, imagining the slick, uncomfortable sensation of wet wool pressed against skin. If your boots were soaked, they might steam as well, a peculiar blend of misery and relief, proof that warmth still existed. Some interpreters of frontier life propose differing views on whether sleeping in wet clothes was universally practiced, or more of a desperate measure. The written accounts vary widely. A few men insisted on removing anything damp. Others slept fully dressed from hat to socks, regardless of wetness, preferring not to fight the cold air at all. The conflicting descriptions create a complicated picture, one that reflects the endless improvisation required to survive. You exhale slowly and let your body imagine the shift gradually, inch by inch, your damp garments begin to warm. The robe traps your heat. The boughs insulate you from the frozen ground. The ember bed adds its gentle breath. The cold around you is still merciless, but inside your little cocoon, tiny pockets of comfort emerge. You bring your gloved hand to your chest, pressing lightly against the imaginary damp cloth beneath. Your fingertips sense the warmth gathering there. It is not pleasant warmth. It is gritty, stubborn warmth, hard-earned, the kind of warmth that feels like endurance rather than comfort. And yet it is enough to get you through the night. A faint sound echoes across the clearing, a branch snapping under its own frozen weight. You blink slowly, half drowsy now. In this imagined world, your clothes cling icy and heavy at first, then warm and pliable as your body heat does its quiet work. You begin to understand how a mountain man could sleep in wet garments without succumbing to the cold's cruelty. You curl tighter into the robe, burying your face in the fur. The smells of pine smoke, damp wool and leather weave together into a strangely familiar mixture. The steam near your chest gives off a subtle warmth, soft and persistent. It is strange, this sense of comfort carved out of discomfort. The night deepens, pressing its cold hands against the boulder that branches the snow itself. But inside your little shelter, beneath your robe and against drying fabric, you feel your heat building your breath, steadying your limbs, sinking into a slow, dream-touched drift. Wrapped in heavy hides and determination, you settle into the uneasy but necessary comfort of drying your clothes the only way the wilderness allowed, with your own stubborn warmth. You shift slightly in your pine bough bed, the last wisps of warmth from your drying clothes settling against your ribs. The night has grown quieter, heavy, with the kind of silence that makes every sound seem closer than it is. Your fire is little more than a dull orange memory now, and the wind brushes softly against the nearby branches. This is the hour when sleep comes, in thin slices easily disturbed by the slightest noise. And mountain men, whether travelling alone or in groups, often spent these frozen nights half awake, aware of every echo, every movement, every whisper of the dark. Guard rotations, night noises, these shape the frontier experience as much as hunger or cold. You lie still, imagining yourself one of several travellers huddled in a small camp. Someone had to stay awake. Someone always did. Notes scattered in old expedition logbooks suggest that rotating night watches became an unspoken rule whenever more than one man was present. No one wrote it as law. It simply emerged from necessity. You picture a companion rising stiffly from his bedding, pulling on half-frozen moccasins, stepping toward the fire with slumped shoulders but alert eyes. You tug your robe tighter and imagine lying closest to the warmth, returning to a semi-conscious doze while another takes up the silent vigil. Above you the wind threads itself through the branches, making them sway with a low groan. Somewhere in the distance a faint crack sounds, not threatening but unmistakable. Perhaps a branch collapsing under frost, perhaps something alive shifting through the underbrush. You listen closely, your heartbeat slowing your ears, tuned to the smallest disturbances. A fragment of campfire memory passed along by old wilderness storytellers paints a vivid picture. One trapper claimed he could identify wolves, deer, and even raccoons just by the way their steps pressed into the snow at night. Not the prints left behind, the sound of the steps themselves. Whether he was boasting or telling the truth, the tale lingers because you can almost believe it in a place as quiet as this. You listen now, imagining faint, delicate footfalls far beyond your fire's circle. You shift your head slightly on your arm. The night seems to amplify every texture and movement, your robe rustling faintly, the pine boughs settling beneath you, even your own breath drifting upward in a soft silvered cloud. And above all of it, those nocturnal sounds, not loud but constant. A snap of frost, a distant call, the sighing of trees. You've never been more aware of how alive the world remains, even in its coldest hours. As you lie there, you consider how these men judged danger. Sometimes a noise was nothing, sometimes everything. Details extracted from surviving winter gear, such as notched sticks used as rattling alarms, hint that some travellers set up crude warning systems before bedding down. A string around the camp's perimeter tied with little bits of bone or metal could alert a sleeping man if something stumbled through the boundary. You picture that now, hearing a faint clink carried by the wind, imagining how your eyes would snap open at once. Your gaze drifts toward the dying fire. When it's low, shadows stretch longer and deeper across the snow, shifting in subtle ways that sometimes trick the mind. In letters retold by descendants of early trappers, several men admitted that nighttime shapes often appeared to move even when nothing was there. A trick of firelight, or the cold, or nerves worn thin from months of isolation. In your half-dreaming state, you can see why the darkness seems to breathe. A gentle rustle grazes the edge of your awareness, and you lift your head listening. You feel that instinctive tightening in your chest, the one the mountain men knew well, not fear exactly, but readiness. A rabbit, a fox, or just wind sliding across old bark. Those who study frontier experiences rarely agree on how fearful these men truly were at night. Some argue they slept lightly from constant vigilance. Others believe hardened travellers grew indifferent to ordinary noises. The lack of consistent testimony leaves the truth suspended somewhere in the middle, drifting like frost between branches. You ease your position, letting your robe settle around you once more. The man on watch in your mind at least shifts his weight near the fire, adding a stick to the coals. The faint crackle that follows is soothing enough to lull you back toward the edge of sleep. You close your eyes halfway, letting your ears remain awake even as your body sinks. You begin to sense how much information sound carried in these nights. The hush of snow falling from a tree, the sudden wing beat of an owl launching into darkness, the muffled thump of a deer landing after bounding over buried undergrowth. In these frozen hours you didn't see danger coming, you heard it. And hearing required you to sleep lightly like a creature of the woods. Your breath warms the fur near your chin. You nestle deeper into your robe. A distant howl echoes faintly through the mountains, thin and far away. Not a threat, just a reminder that you're not alone in this great white wilderness. Your muscles relax as the sound fades. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, then lift again when a new noise whispers across the clearing. A shifting branch, a sigh of wind. Nothing harmful, but your body reacts anyway, caught in that strange state between rest and alertness. Your imagined companion returns from his watch, brushing snow from his shoulders. He nudges you gently, whispering something low. It's your turn. You rise slowly, leaving your warm nest and stepping toward the fire. The cold clamps onto you with renewed force. But as you wrap your robe around your shoulders, you feel a flicker of pride. You're part of the circle now, awake while the others sleep, guarding the fragile flame that keeps everyone alive. You gaze into the darkness while your companions breathe softly behind you. Their trust rests on your shoulders for the next quiet hour. And in this stillness, in this mingling of vigilance and fatigue, you understand something the mountain men knew intimately. Night does not sleep. So neither do you, at least not completely. You settle into your turn on the imaginary watch, the fire glowing faintly at your side while your companions sleep in uneven breaths behind you. The cold presses steadily against your cheek, and the night stretches so wide it makes you feel small and strangely weightless. Hours like these do something to the mind. With no lanterns, no walls, no human chatter to fill the space, the darkness becomes a canvas onto which imagination paints freely. And mountain men living so close to the raw edge of the wilderness often carried beliefs, omens and quiet superstitions into the night with them, not because they were weak-minded, but because the frontier made the mind feel porous and alert to things unseen. You pull your robe closer around your shoulders, listening to the faint crackle of the coals. Somewhere in the old wilderness narratives there's mention of travellers speaking softly of night spirits, not in the sense of literal ghosts, but as a way of describing the tension that came with deep winter darkness. They used the term the way you might use bad feeling today, a shorthand for moments when the hair on the back of your neck rose for no clear reason. You feel something like that now, that instinctive prickling as a gust of wind snakes between the trees. You raise your head, slightly, eyes scanning the shadows. Beyond the glow of the fire, everything looks uncertain shapes that might be bushes or rocks or something else entirely. A faintly unusual comment preserved in a faded trapper's notebook described how one man swore he saw figures moving at the tree line during a long winter night. When pressed, he admitted they were probably branches waving, but the sensation of being watched refused to leave him. You understand that now. In the deep hush of this cold, every ordinary movement becomes loaded with meaning. The breeze shifts, carrying a thin whistle through the branches. You tighten your grip on your robe. There was also the matter of luck charms. Not everyone used them, but some did. A sliver of bone tied to a string, a feather tucked into a coat, a small stone kept in a pocket, because someone's grandfather said it kept harm at bay. Writings scratched into the margins of battered journals suggest that such tokens offered comfort when logic alone wasn't enough. You check the pocket of your imagined coat and picture a small keepsake inside, perhaps a bead or a carved bit of antler warm from your body, a quiet anchor against the darkness. You listen again to the wind. It whistles, then quiets, then whistles again. The rhythm seems almost deliberate, as if something is breathing out there. You narrow your eyes and lean forward, letting your breath fog the air before you. These small illusions were common companions to solitary nights. Those who explore frontier psychology propose different interpretations of how widespread such impressions were. Some insist they were everyday occurrences for exhausted wanderers. Others think only the loneliest or coldest nights conjured them. The evidence is fragmented, leaving the question floating without a finish. You turn slightly to glance at your sleeping companions. Their outlines are mounded beneath robes and blankets, rising and falling with slow breaths. The sound is soothing, a reminder that you're not truly alone, even if the night feels endless. You shift your stance, easing a stiff knee, and then hold still again, sensing the forest adjusting around you. A soft thump echoes somewhere to your right. Not loud, but distinct. You hold your breath listening. Could be snow falling from a branch. Could be an animal. Could be nothing at all. But in an hour like this, your mind entertains options it would never consider in daylight. You imagine a half-glimpsed form moving through the trees, tall, pale, vanishing. You imagine strange old stories told by campfires, stories about watchers older than the pines drifting through winter nights. None of it feels real, yet none of it feels entirely impossible either. You shift again, feeling your heart slow only after several long breaths. Your hands warm against the inside of your robe. The ember bed behind you gives a quiet sigh as a coal collapses. You turn your head just enough to check it, making sure the tiny glow is still alive. Fire even faint brings comfort. Light always does. Your gaze returns to the forest. The shadows seem softer now, less menacing. You realize the strange tension that had gathered in your muscles is easing. Perhaps the noise was truly nothing more than snow dropping from a branch. Perhaps your imagination simply slipped into motion, following the old pattern of humans trying to understand the unknown. You let out a slow breath, feeling it warm your chin. Another memory drifts into your mind from long ago winter tales. Someone claimed that on certain nights when the cold was sharp enough to sting the bones, the silence itself felt like a presence. Not hostile, not friendly, just aware. A concept more poetic than literal. But you can imagine why a person sleeping alone in the mountains might create language for such a feeling. The wilderness didn't need to threaten you to remind you of its enormity. You shift your weight, stamping your foot gently to keep it warm. Behind you, one of your companions murmurs in his sleep, rolling slightly to adjust a cold patch. His voice breaks the stillness for a moment, grounding you. The sense of watchfulness that had gripped you fades into the background, replaced by a quieter alertness, the practical kind born of real dangers, not imagined ones. Wolves, cougars, strangers, a fire threatening to die. Those things require attention far more than unearthly thoughts ever could. Still, the memory of the tension lingers in a soft way, like mist that hasn't fully evaporated. You feel strangely connected to the men who lived these nights, before you men who stared at dark tree lines and felt their minds wander into old tales and unseen shapes. The boundary between real and imagined always thins during winter's darkest hours. You draw your robe tighter one last time, settling your shoulders. The forest hums quietly. The fire glows faintly. Your companions sleep on, and as another hour of watch stretches in front of you, you accept the strange truth the frontier taught so many before you. At night in the deep cold, the world feels wider than the mind can hold, and your thoughts must learn to walk beside that vastness without getting lost in it. You remain on watch a little longer, the fire's glow softening until it becomes no more than a dim orange breath against the snow. Your companions sleep bundled in their robes, shifting occasionally, sighing under the weight of cold dreams. You settle back into your nest, letting someone else take the next rotation, and as you close your eyes halfway, you realize something the mountain men understood instinctively in deep winter sleep was rarely a gentle drift. It twisted, blurred, and reshaped itself under exhaustion, hunger, and the strange pressure of the cold. Dreams could be sharp as broken glass or soft as smoke, and sometimes when the body was pushed too far, the mind wandered into places that felt like half hallucinations. You ease your head onto your arm and let the night wrap itself around you. Your breathing deepens. The cold nips at your face, but your core is warm, tucked beneath fur and pine. Slowly, the line between waking and sleeping softens. Those who slept in this kind of cold often described their dreams later as unusually vivid or disjointed. A passing comment in an old winter diary mentions a trapper dreaming of bright summer meadows, while his body shivered so hard he woke with his teeth aching. You feel that contrast now, your mind drift into warm places even though the world around you is frozen hard. You let your thoughts meander into a soft haze. The fire's glow flickers behind your eyelids, painting reddish shapes that stretch and shrink like distant figures. The cold shapes your breathing, making it slow and rhythmic. In that rhythm, images take form, warm beams of sunlight, heavy green canopies, a creek running fast over smooth stones. All things your body longs for in the dead of winter, but warmth doesn't linger long in dreams shaped by fatigue. Another image surfaces, snow falling endlessly, each flake impossibly large, drifting as though gravity has loosened its hold. You sense the weight of the wilderness pressing into your imagination. A small, strange memory passed through generations of winter travellers suggested that dreams during freezing nights often featured movement, walking, climbing, running. Perhaps because the sleeping body, stiff from cold, ached for motion even while unconscious. You shift slightly beneath your robe as if your muscles are echoing the dream. As you breathe deeper, the fire's last embers crack softly, and the sound grows enormous in your drifting mind. It becomes something different, a footstep, a twig breaking a voice. Dreams twist ordinary sounds until they turn symbolic. You aren't afraid. The sensation is more curious than unsettling. Sleep in cold weather is layered. A part of you remains aware of your surroundings, monitoring for danger, while another part drifts into places that feel detached from the physical world. Your breaths slow further. The pine scent rises around you. Shadows ripple across your closed eyelids, shifting in ways that mirror the faint dance of flame outside your robe. A fragment of wilderness lore describes how men caught between exhaustion and cold sometimes hallucinated shapes in the snow, small animals or distant figures, only to blink and find nothing there. Whether these were genuine dreams, cold-induced visions, or tricks of the firelight, remains a topic that specialists examining frontier life haven't fully aligned on. You feel how such uncertainty could exist. The difference between reality and imagination narrows in moments like this. In your drifting mind, you see the ski lighten not with dawn, but with some internal glow. Stars wheel fast, spinning like sparks from a fire. The river from your dream rushes louder, then dissolves into silence. You feel your eyelids flutter as your consciousness dips in and out, caught between comfort and discomfort, sleep and cold. The strange intensity of winter dreams often had roots in the body. Hunger especially shaped them. Those who endured lean months frequently dreamed of food, warm bread, roasted meat, fat bubbling in a pan. You sense that now, a sudden vivid image of a steaming stew appearing in your imagination with startling clarity enough to make your stomach tighten. Cold and hunger teem together, painting dreams with cravings as sharp as any waking need. Your breathing deepens again. In your mind the trees sway in unnatural arcs, bending like soft reeds beneath a summer wind. But it isn't summer, not in the waking world. Your fingers twitch as if reaching for something warm. A soft, muffled crunch of snow reaches your ears, a real sound, small and distant. But in your drifting state, your mind reinterprets it. The crunch becomes a wave, then a footstep, then nothing at all. You pull your robe closer in your half-sleep. The warmth gathers around your chest, but your toes twitch with a faint chill. This interplay, warm, cold, is part of why dreams lose their grounding. One passing story, recited by a weather-beaten old traveller, described a time he dreamed of firelight dancing across a cabin wall, only to wake and find no fire at all, just the glow of moonlight on snow. He spoke of the moment with lingering confusion, as though unsure which image had been real. You feel that same blurred boundary. The ember bed below you radiates a thin, steady warmth, yet when you drift into deeper sleep you imagine the heat growing stronger, wrapping around you like a sunlit blanket. Then, with the next breath, you imagine the cold creeping in, frost rising from the ground like pale smoke. Your mind vacillates, caught between two realities. The longer you lie there, the more fragmented your thoughts become. Faces you've never seen appear and dissolve. You hear the echo of a river that isn't there. A mountain ridge rises behind your eyelids, taller than any real ridge could be, its slopes glowing with golden snow. The strangeness doesn't alarm you, it flows through you like water. Another whisper of wind slips through the clearing, and in your drifting state it becomes a voice for a moment, soft, incomprehensible, neither friendly nor hostile. You shift, slightly aware that your imagination is running parallel to the real world, each bleeding into the other. Those long nights, stretching for months at a time, could make even the strongest mind wander. Sleep finally pulls harder at your limbs. The cold nips less fiercely, now dulled by your layers. You feel as though you're floating just above your body, skimming the surface of consciousness. Dreams continue to whirl, shifting landscapes, strange sounds. Warmth, blooming and fading shadows that stretch like living things. And as you settle deeper into this drifting mental fog, you reach an understanding that only those who have slept in bitter winter can know. In the mountains, dreams do not simply come to you. They are shaped by the cold, carved by fatigue, sculpted by hunger, and they carry pieces of the night inside them. Wrapped in fur and half-waking visions, you let your mind drift further into the delicate, shimmering edge of sleep. You lie deeper in your bedding, now warm enough to drift, but alert enough to rise if anything stirs. The cold wraps around your shelter like a quiet animal, patient and watchful. The fire is nearly gone, reduced to faint glowing chips beneath a scatter of ash. Beyond your little nest, the forest stands dark and vast, its shape softened by moonlight. And in such a night mountain, men often faced another presence. Not imagined spirits this time, but living predators who shared the land and sometimes passed close enough for breath to mingle with the cold air. You turn slightly listening, and the snow shifts beneath you with a muffled creak. Far off, a thin cry breaks the silence, not a howl, not quite, but something drifting between a call and a warning. Traces in fur trade correspondence hint that wolves sometimes circle camps out of curiosity rather than hunger, pacing through drifts with light, deliberate steps. You picture the faint press of paws in untouched snow illuminated by moonlight as delicate as silver ink. You pull your robe closer and scan the dark shapes at the tree line. Your breath fogs in front of you, rising in slow ribbons. Somewhere in the deeper shadows you imagine a pair of eyes glinting for a moment before vanishing. It is unnerving, yes, but also strangely calm. The predators that roam these mountains, wolves, cougars, even the occasional bear that failed to stay properly asleep for the winter, rarely attacked a group unless driven by hunger. Still, their presence was felt. You feel it now, that prickle along your neck that nature uses as a quiet reminder that you are a guest here. As you settle back into the pine boughs, an odd snippet preserved through family retelling suggests itself to your mind. One old hunter claimed that cougars moved so silently at night that the only sign of their passing was the sudden stillness of birds tucked deep into the trees. A strange detail, but you can almost believe it. In this darkness, silence feels textured, layered. A soft footstep could blend into it perfectly. You shift your feet beneath the robe, feeling the heat from your bedding, slowly reclaim your toes. The forest remains quiet, but not empty. Snow-laden branches occasionally give way with a soft thump, sending down powder that sparkles faintly in the moonlight. The sudden noise makes you inhale sharply, but your pulse calms when no follow-up sound comes. It is just winter performing its slow collapse, the weight too much for some branches to bear. Still, your mind drifts back to the stories of predators observing camps from a distance. Some men who survived long seasons out here spoke of waking to find fresh tracks inches from where they slept, wolf prints crisp and unhurried, or the larger, rounder impressions of a cat moving with eerie precision. Whether these animals came to investigate sense, warmth, or simple curiosity remains unclear. Those comparing narratives from different regions reach differing conclusions concerning how brave or cautious these creatures truly were around human camps. But the footprints themselves remain the clearest evidence predators watched even if unseen. You draw your robe up to your chin and listen again. A shift in the wind carries a faint musk, wild, sharp, a little bitter. Perhaps just the scent of crushed pine resin. Perhaps something else. Your pulse quickens briefly before settling back into its slow rhythm. Out here your body reacts to signals long before your mind interprets them. You let your gaze follow the moonlit snow, its surface rippling with pale blue shadows. In your half-drowsy state, the shapes seem to breathe. A mound could be a rock, or a crouching figure. A cluster of branches could be a deer, or something that moves with deeper purpose. Your imagination stirs, but your instincts remain steady. You are prepared to listen rather than leap to conclusions. The forest hums faintly with distant life. Somewhere out there, something shifts a subtle movement, quiet but certain. You tighten your blanket around your shoulders, feeling a slow pulse of heat gather beneath the fur. You imagine wolves gliding along a ridge, their noses catching the drifting scent of your dying fire. You imagine a cougar perched on a high branch, paws curled, watching without malice or fear. These thoughts don't frighten you. They anchor you to the reality of the wild, to a world where humans and predators shared the same cold breath. As sleep begins to tug at the edges of your awareness, you recall a tale whispered across snowbound campsites. Someone once swore a bear slept beside his shelter, drawn by the warmth of his fire. In morning light, he found the impression of a massive body in the snow mere feet away. Whether the story is literal or exaggerated, you can feel how such a rumor might grow. The wilderness occasionally pulled humans and animals into odd fleeting partnerships when the cold became unbearable of both. You nestle deeper into your pine boughs, letting the small warmth trapped beneath your robe continue its patient work. Your eyes grow heavy, but your ears remain attentive, following the forest's shifting patterns. A crack, a sigh of wind, a soft, distant movement that could be snow or fur. Your breathing evens out. The predators of this landscape are somewhere beyond the darkness, their lives unfolding parallel to yours. You do not fear them here. You acknowledge them silent neighbours moving through the night, and with that acceptance the boundary between vigilance and rest softens. You drift towards sleep knowing that the wilderness watches, listens and lives beside you, but does not always seek to harm. Wrapped in fur and fading ember light, you close your eyes as the night keeps its quiet balance. You shift within your robe, the scents of pine and smoke lingering as thin threads of warmth drift across your chest. The night remains steady and immense around you, but now a deeper stillness settles, the kind that invites memory as much as observation. Mountain men, like anyone exposed to harsh winters, paid attention to cold in a way few people do today. They remembered certain nights not by dates or events, but by the exact feeling of the air, how it bit, how it stung, how it pressed like a heavy hand against the ribs. Tonight, as you lie in your shelter, you imagine what it might have been like to face the coldest mountain nights ever recorded in those rugged years. You exhale slowly and watch your breath saturate the air with white vapour. It drifts upward like a ghost, then disappears. In a distant corner of your memory, knowledge whispers that written glimpses from fur company journals mention winters so severe that river ice thickened until it muffled even the thunder of distant avalanches. You imagine that now the world so frozen that sound itself dulls. Every movement feels slowed, as if winter has thickened the air into something you must wade through to breathe. Your fingers curl within your gloves. The cold seems sharper, as though the sky above you is carved from glass. A pale wind slips down from unseen ridges and brushes across your face. It feels like the kind of wind that empties valleys of all warmth, the kind that made frontier travellers record their astonishment when mercury in primitive thermometers plunged so far it refused to climb again for days. Even imagining it makes you pull your robe tighter, feeling its weight gather along your spine. You shift slightly, creating a deeper hollow in your pine bedding. Somewhere in winter, stories passed down between families, there's mention of a night where the air grew so cold that exposed sweat froze instantly on a man's skin, leaving him glittering like a creature carved from frost. A strange, almost poetic detail, yet grounded enough in frontier folklore to feel possible. You imagine brushing your cheek and feeling crystals form beneath your fingertips, fine as powdered glass. The ember bed beneath you gives a small, weary sigh, a faint pulse of heat rising like the last heartbeat of a resting creature. You savour that warmth, knowing that on truly brutal nights, even a healthy fire struggled to keep up. Those who have studied weather reports from the era do not fully agree on the accuracy of the coldest readings, as instruments varied wildly, but there is general acceptance that some winter spells in the Rockies dipped lower than anything most travellers had ever known. The ambiguity of those figures only amplifies the legend. The cold becomes a character rather than a number. You lift your head slightly and look toward the moonlit drifts. The snow reflects blue light in a way that feels ethereal, almost otherworldly. Cold creates beauty, but beauty with a razor edge. On the worst nights, breath froze along the edges of blankets, forming tiny feathers of ice that made cloth stiff as bark by dawn. You imagine running your hand along your robe to find a crust of frozen moisture, where your breath landed repeatedly, creating a brittle rim that crackled when touched. Your hands settle on your chest again, and you feel the tension in your muscles trying to resist the creeping chill. In a memory of old mountain lore, someone described waking on a brutally cold morning to find the very air crackling faintly, as if the atmosphere itself had become brittle. They said their hair fractured when they moved. An exaggeration perhaps, but as you lie here and listen to the faint, sharp rustles of snow adjusting across the clearing, the image feels strangely fitting, a kind of emotional truth, even if the physical details stretch belief. You flex your feet inside your boots, imagining how the worst cold stole feeling from toes within minutes. Some described it as numbness that felt almost gentle at first, a deceptive softness that hid the danger beneath. You picture the cold seeping upward like a slow tide, each inch of skin becoming less responsive, less your own. These dangers made the coldest nights unforgettable. Men spoke of them years later, their voices changing, softening as though recalling an encounter with something ancient. The wind stirs again. You tilt your face toward it. It is light but sharp, the kind of wind that makes trees groan softly under its force. Snow lifts in tiny spirals across the clearing, catching moonlight like scatterings of powdered diamond. You feel the world tighten with cold. Even the animals retreat on nights like this, leaving only the faint tracks of small creatures that dare to cross drifts in search of food. You rub your gloved hands together, warming the joints. Stories whispered by later generations portray certain freezing nights as tests almost spiritual in nature. A challenge between the traveller and the mountain. Endure or yield. Sleep or freeze. Fire or darkness. You sense that challenge now not as threat but as atmosphere, the weight of the elements pressing close, waiting to see how you respond. You lower your head again and breathe through your robe to warm the air before inhaling it. The cold above you feels monumental, a silent cathedral of frost stretching from ridge to ridge. Your eyelids grow heavy, exhaustion tugging at you. But any drifting dream is cut short by a sudden jolt of chill from the ground. The coldest nights were like that sleep came in fragments, never all at once. A shifting breeze, a fading ember, a patch of frost invading the bedding. All these things could wake a sleeper. You adjust your pine boughs, tucking them more firmly under your hip. This tiny act of maintenance feels crucial. Men who lived through record-breaking cold learned the habit of constant adjusting, reworking their bedding, turning their bodies, rewrapping their robes. These small motions built a rhythm through the night, one that kept blood moving and spirits alert. You breathe again and let your gaze fall across the clearing. Everything is white, silver blue. Everything is cold. But in this stillness you begin to understand how those legendary freezing nights etched themselves into memory. Cold shapes not only the body but the mind. It makes every small warmth precious, every flicker of fire a triumph, every breath a reminder of endurance. And as you nestle once more into your robe, letting your eyes drift half shut, the cold no longer feels like an enemy, just a presence immense and indifferent, weaving itself through your sleep like a silent mountain companion. You sink deeper into your bedding, letting the memory of those brutal freezes fade into the stillness around you. The night is quieter now, softened by the steady hush of distant wind. Your thoughts drift not toward danger this time, but toward something warmer, something the mountain men carried with them through even the bleakest winters. Memories of summer gatherings known as rendezvous. Nights like this, wrapped in a robe beneath the stars, they often let their minds wander back to those lively weeks when the high country pulsed with laughter, trade music and human closeness, and you feel yourself slipping into that same recollection, letting brightness seep into the edges of your cold surroundings. You lift your head slightly and picture a wide green valley weeks away from the snowbound world you're lying in. Traders and trappers converge there each summer, hauling pelts, supplies and stories across the mountains. Bits of correspondence exchanged after those gatherings indicate they were more than business. They were reunions after months of isolation. You imagine hearing echoes of that life now, distant voices carried on the wind, a reminder that winter was only one face of these mountains. You shift your weight on the pine boughs and let the contrast settle. Here you lie in a world of frost and silence, yet your thoughts wander into warmth and noise. A faint odd memory preserved in old family recollections describes a trapper dreaming during a freezing night of the music he heard at a rendezvous so vividly that he awoke believing someone was playing a fiddle outside his shelter. You almost feel that now, a phantom tune threading through your imagination as the snow glows gently in moonlight. The ember bed beneath you offers its faint warmth upward, and the gesture feels symbolic. Firelight had been a constant companion at summer rendezvous too, though in a very different way. Instead of shivering bodies huddled around a dying flame, you imagine dozens of fires stretching across the grassland, lighting up faces, cooking meals, and illuminating nights full of conversation. The contrast makes your cold shelter feel strangely richer, as if it contains echoes of that past joy. You adjust your robe, tugging it closer around your chin, and let your mind drift deeper into those recollections. Goods were traded: furs for rifles, traps for blankets, metal for leather. But beyond the commerce, people shared news of births, travels, illnesses, and misadventures. Traces found in scattered handwritten notes reveal that some men kept tiny tokens from rendezvous: a coloured bead, a scrap of ribbon, a carved pipe. These objects, small and fragile, carried warmth through winter nights long after the crowds dispersed. You imagine keeping something like that tucked inside your coat now, a little reminder of the world beyond the snow. The wind stirs, brushing pale frost from a nearby pine branch. You glance toward the tree line and imagine for a moment the heavy green of summer replacing the white drifts. In your mind's eye, men lounge on grassy slopes, women laugh as they trade or cook, and horses shift lazily under the sun. The whole scene shimmers with warmth, warmth of the sun, warmth of community, warmth of shared living. You nestle deeper into your bedding, letting that warmth seep inward, even though the night around you remains utterly frozen. A soft groan comes from the boughs beneath you as you shift. You settle again, slower this time. While your fingers curl inside your gloves, your thoughts linger on stories of men who survived winter by telling tales of rendezvous to one another. One story passed quietly along frontier. Families mentions two trappers who recited the same series of summer memories, night after night, simply because it kept their spirits afloat. They used the recollections as if they were fuel. You can understand that now, memories warming the heart while the cold gnawed at the body. As your breath forms a pale cloud in front of your face, you imagine being at one of those fires, hearing the bright hum of conversation, smelling roasted meat instead of smoked hides, feeling grass instead of frozen ground beneath your palms. The shift feels dreamlike, as though you're standing in both seasons at once. The cold tries to anchor you, but your mind slips easily into the warmth. Some who study frontier culture point out that rendezvous stories often appear embellished in later retellings, made grander or more joyful than they truly were. Others counter that memory behaves that way under hardship. The warmth of the past swells in proportion to the severity of the present. That lack of agreement leaves a pleasant ambiguity, and you feel it now, letting summer memories wash over your winter camp like a tide. You glance at the fading fire and imagine a much larger blaze, one surrounded by dozens of people. You imagine laughter bouncing across the valley, the smell of horses thick in the air, the clang of metal cups, the thrum of voices in overlapping waves. You imagine someone telling a joke so funny that even the hardest trapper wipes tears from his eyes. Then another shift, you exhale, and the frost of the real night takes shape again. The camp is quiet. The snow glows faintly. Your companions breathe in slow, steady patterns, and yet the warmth of that remembered summer lingers, settling into your chest like a small ember you didn't know you could carry. You stretch your legs beneath your robe. Your toes, once cold, feel warmer now, as if touched by the sunlight of your imagination. The pine scent around you seems softer, and your own breathing falls into a gentle rhythm, one perfect for drifting towards sleep. From far away, impossibly far, you can almost hear that faint fiddle tune again, the echo of a rendezvous night cutting through the winter silence. It fades as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind a quiet peace in its wake. And with that peace gently wrapped around you, you settle into your bedding, warmed not by fire but by human memory, the kind that lights even the coldest wilderness from within. You lie still, your thoughts drifting somewhere between memory and the soft, fading warmth of your ember bed, when another reality of frontier nights comes into focus. Out here, where every ounce of weight mattered, and every object had to earn its place in a pack, even the most ordinary items held double or triple duty. Tools weren't just tools. They became pillows, insulation windbreaks, even makeshift shields against the cold. And as you shift slightly under your robe, you begin to feel the quiet ingenuity that shaped every night on the frozen trail. You lift your head a little, imagining your scattered gear around the fire's dying glow. A hatchet lies near your hip, its handle worn smooth from use. Scattered fragments in old trading archives hint that a hatchet was rarely placed far from a sleeper. It served as both a nighttime reassurance and a surprisingly effective anchor for bedding. If wedged the right way, it held blankets in place, stopping wind from peeling them open while you slept. You imagine tucking the handle beneath your bows, now feeling the added weight securing your robe around your legs. Next, you turn your attention to the saddle blanket you'd carry if you had a horse. Thick, coarse, and heavy, it wasn't made for comfort, yet comfort sometimes appeared in unexpected forms. An unconventional recollection shared by later descendants describes how some travellers laid their saddle blankets on top of snow to create a barrier that didn't freeze as quickly as ordinary cloth. You imagine doing the same, shaping a rough shield beneath your pine bedding, and feel how it might slow the cold that seeps upward from the ground. The wind shifts gently, brushing your face with its cold breath. You draw your robe closer, feeling the subtle warmth gathering inside your little cocoon. A trap or snare might lie to your left in your imagined camp, its metal cold, but functional. You picture placing it beside your hip not for hunting but for practicality. Some mountain wanderers used their metal traps as weights, to hold robes closed, or even to prop up a small flap of hide to block wind at their back. In this frigid setting, every object took on new possibilities shaped by necessity rather than design. You shift your legs beneath the robe and bring your knees closer to your chest. The movement stirs the scent of pine from your bedding, and you take a slow breath. Traces embedded in surviving artifacts point toward a clever habit, rolling one's spare shirt or leggings into a tight bundle to use as a pillow. Not for softness was rare out here, but to elevate the head and keep cold air from sinking directly into the lungs. You imagine placing such a bundle beneath your neck now, lifting your head just enough to ease your breathing. The fire crackles softly, but its warmth is muted, barely reaching you. You turn slightly to face its faint glow. Frontier travellers often used their cooking pots in equally inventive ways. An overturned pot could serve as a windbreak for the face or a shield set at the edge of the bedding to stop drafts from sneaking in. A rare mention tucked into a frontier margin notes someone using a kettle as a foot warmer after filling it with heated stones. You picture your own pot sitting beside your boots, radiating a gentle heat into the cold night air. As you settle your weight again, feeling the boughs shift beneath you, your awareness drifts toward your pack, that sturdy, overburdened companion. In many winter camps, the pack doubled as a backrest, or even a partial wall. You imagine propping it behind your shoulders now, its bulk shielding you from a stray breeze. The sensation feels practical grounding, as though you are borrowing the solidity of your belongings to strengthen your fragile shelter. A faint rustle in the trees draws your attention, but nothing follows. You breathe more easily, then curl your fingers around the imagined handle of your knife. Not in fear, just in practicality. Some trappers slept with the flat of the blade tucked beneath their blankets, using the handle as a kind of anchor to stop the covers from shifting. Others placed the sheath against a cold patch to block the draft. Tools interlocked with clothing, bedding, and instinct until everything served the single purpose of survival. As you lie there, your mind wanders through the subtle choreography of night preparations, arranging objects close enough to reach, but not close enough to tangle. Filling cracks between blankets with scraps of hide, tucking gloves under the knees to warm them by morning. Frontier living required that kind of intuitive rearranging night after night. Those who examine these practices arrive at no shared conclusion regarding whether the mountain men preferred rigid routines or improvised strategies. Some believe they followed consistent nightly rituals refined through experience. Others suggest that every night brought different needs shaped by terrain, wind, and fatigue. You sense both possibilities now, the comfort of routine and the sharp awareness of ever-shifting conditions. You ease your body deeper into the bedding, letting the robe seal around your shoulders. The objects you've placed in your mind, hatchet, pot, saddle, blanket pack, form a protective ring around you, not in a literal sense, but in the quiet psychological reassurance they provide. Each item heavy with purpose contributes a small layer to your survival. You stretch one leg, then the other, feeling the stiffness in your joints. The imagined weight of your gear presses gently against the boughs, grounding you. You breathe deeply, letting the air flow slowly, preserving warmth. And as you drift closer to sleep, you realize that nothing in a mountain camp was ever just one thing. Every tool, every scrap, every layer of cloth was part of a larger design, a makeshift architecture built to outwit the cold one night at a time. Wrapped in the resourcefulness that shaped old frontier evenings, you close your eyes and let the night settle softly around you. You lie still, wrapped in your robe, the pine scent drifting softly around you, when another truth rises gently in your mind. The knowledge that kept mountain men alive in winter did not come solely from their own trial and error. Much of what they learned, how to move, how to rest, how to keep warmth close while frost prowled the night, came from the teachings and quiet demonstrations of the indigenous nations whose lands they travelled. You can almost sense those influences now woven into every motion you make in your imaginary shelter. You shift slightly, adjusting your bedding so the pine boughs cushion your hips more evenly. As you do, you remember that long before trappers entered these mountains, winter travellers already understood how to sleep lightly in deep snow, how to drift between wakefulness and rest without letting cold claim their limbs. Scattered hints preserved in old fur trade correspondence show that newcomers often copied techniques from the people who had lived here for generations, how to choose sheltering ravines, how to insulate with natural materials, how to warm the body from the core outward rather than chasing heat at the edges. You breathe slowly, settling into the knowledge that your imagined bedding itself echoes those teachings. The soft crackle of pine needles beneath you reminds you of stories, later passed down through families about certain winter camps where men were shown how to gather boughs in layers, allowing air pockets to form naturally. That simple principle, elegant in its quiet efficiency, spread widely through the winter trails. You think of how your own nest is built the same way, not through guesswork, but through an inherited logic shaped by centuries of observation. A faint rustle stirs the branches overhead. You pause listening. As the sound fades, another recollection drifts forward. Indigenous travellers sometimes relied on snow, not just as a burden, but as a partner. They carved low shelters, packed drifts for windbreaks, and used the snow's own insulating qualities to trap warmth. A rather unusual memory from regional winter stories describes using thin snow walls to channel wind away from sleeping spots, creating calm pockets of air, even in fierce storms. You feel that concept now, imagining the drift beside your camp doing exactly the same work. You adjust your robe again, brushing the fur near your cheek. Many indigenous winter methods emphasize controlling moisture above all else, keeping sweat, breath, and snow from accumulating in fabric where it could freeze. These techniques filtered quietly into the routines of trappers over the years. You sense the wisdom in that now as you manage each small breath, letting warm air settle beneath the robe before letting it escape. The ember bed hums faintly beneath the pine boughs. You can almost picture someone showing you how to place the coals, not built high, but spread and cooled until they provided an underlying warmth without danger. Traces embedded in archaeological surveys of old winter camps suggest that similar methods existed long before the fur trade expanded. That continuity makes you smile softly. Warmth has always been a shared human challenge, and good ideas travel far. As you nestle deeper into your shelter, you rub your hands together inside your robe, catching the slow, steady heat your body has built. A few generations of winter travellers recounted how they learned to keep extremities warm by sleeping in curled positions, conserving heat in a compact form. This wasn't written down formally. It passed by gesture, demonstration, and simple example. You curl your knees slightly now, feeling how the position traps warmth along your torso. Some who study cultural exchanges in the frontier environment offer differing interpretations of how willingly trappers acknowledged the origins of their winter habits. Some believe the influence was openly recognized. Others note that journals tend to understate indigenous contributions, leaving gaps that must be pieced together from scattered evidence. The lack of agreement leaves space for imagination and for gratitude. A faint breeze brushes your cheek. You lower your head, pulling the robe closer. You can almost feel someone guiding your motions, tucking the robe under your legs, tightening the edges along your shoulders, ensuring the opening faces away from the wind. These small adjustments were shared from one traveller to another like quiet gifts. You close your eyes halfway and imagine sitting beside an elder, who watches how you settle, then gestures gently toward the tree line, pointing out a better alignment between shelter and wind. You picture learning without many words, learning by watching the practiced ease of someone who has slept beneath snow-covered branches since childhood. In your mind, you echo their gestures, shaping your shelter into something more refined. The pine boughs beneath you shift slightly, creating new pockets of warmth. You press your hand down gently and feel the resilience beneath your palm. Above, the stars glimmer through the branches like tiny embers scattered across the sky. The cold world around you feels vast, but your little nest feels grounded, shaped by knowledge older than the maps drawn by newcomers. Your breathing settles into a calm rhythm. As you lie there, you realize that much of what keeps you warm in this imagined scene, the drift at your side, the layers of boughs, the curl of your body, the way your robe wraps snugly around your core, is part of a legacy handed down through generations who knew these mountains intimately. Their skills became the silent teachers of every winter traveller who followed. Nestled into that quiet lineage of shared wisdom, you let your body relax fully again. The cold still waits outside your shelter, but it feels softer, less imposing, tempered by the knowledge of those who lived in harmony with it, long before you imagined stepping into this night. Wrapped in fur memory and borrowed skill, you breathe slowly until sleep begins to gather around you once more. You breathe slowly beneath your robe, the warmth pooling around your chest as the night continues to unfold in its quiet, icy way. For a moment, everything feels still, the pine boughs, the ember bed, the drift by your side. But as you shift your weight, another truth of frontier winters rises into your awareness. Cold didn't only threaten numb fingers or sleepless nights, it shaped the body itself. It forced men to understand how fatigue, moisture, hunger, and posture influenced their endurance. And as you settle deeper into your bedding, you begin to sense how the human body adapted or strained under winter's relentless pressure. You exhale gently, watching the faint cloud drift upward. The cold nibbles at the edge of your hood, and you tuck your chin down. Bits of surviving medical notes from remote trading sites reveal that winter travel transformed metabolism. Bodies burn through calories at astonishing rates just to maintain warmth. You imagine that now, your imagined stomach feeling hollow, your muscles craving fuel with an urgency that feels almost instinctual. Even in this imagined moment, the cold makes hunger feel sharper. You draw your knees toward your torso. The position is comforting, but also practical. A rather uncommon recollection drawn from winter oral retellings describes how seasoned travellers developed a habit of sleeping in a tightly curled posture, almost like animals conserving heat. The idea was to reduce surface area and protect the vital organs. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth increase in the compressed space beneath your robe. Your limbs feel heavier. Fatigue in cold weather carries a particular weight, not the pleasant heaviness of a warm, tired body, but something slow and dense that seeps into joints. You stretch your fingers inside your gloves, feeling stiffness linger at the knuckles. Cold-made bodies work harder even when motionless. Hearts beat faster. Lungs pulled in air that tasted metallic. Muscles hovered between shivering and stillness, seeking balance. A faint hum from the ember bed reaches your ears, and you imagine its warmth travelling upward in thin waves. Your breathing slows, but not too much, you've read in passing, that some winter travellers warned against falling into overly deep sleep in extreme cold, believing it allowed body temperature to drop too rapidly. Whether their caution was grounded in real risk, or simply folk wisdom, remains open to interpretation among those who study early mountain experiences. But in your shelter you feel yourself resting in that middle space, asleep enough to dream, awake enough to respond. You shift your boots slightly beneath the robe. Toes tingle. In stories preserved through regional families, some old mountain wanderers talked about toe-watching, the habit of lightly flexing the toes every few minutes during cold nights to keep circulation moving. The phrase makes you smile in the dark, yet you instinctively follow the idea, wiggling your toes inside your warm, dreamed-up footwear. The motion sends a small wave of heat into your soles. You adjust your shoulders, letting the pine boughs cradle your back. Your spine feels strangely warm compared to your arms, and you realize that bodies in bitter cold often created odd temperature gradients. Some parts felt almost hot, while others bordered on numb. Travelers learn to recognize these patterns, to rub cold patches to shift weight, off chilled limbs to tighten robes around vulnerable areas. Your eyelids grow heavy, but you force your breath to stay steady. Shallow breathing cools the chest, deep breathing warms it. You take a long inhale through the folds of your robe, letting the air heat before it reaches your lungs. This practice, so simple, echoes techniques that appear in traces of winter teachings across multiple cultures in the region, a shared understanding that cold air must be tamed before entering the body. The wind brushes your boots, startling you slightly. You tuck your feet further beneath the robe and let your heart rate settle. A small flutter of adrenaline warms your muscles. That warmth is welcome. Winter travellers often counted on moments of alertness like this, tiny bursts of heat stirred by instinct. You can feel it working now, chasing away the stiffness that was gathering round your wrists. You shift again, letting your back sink deeper into the pine padding. The scent of sap rises, faintly mixing with the smell of smoke still clinging to your hood. Both scents feel soothing, grounding you in the cold darkness. You take another breath, feeling your ribs expand. The cold outside your robe continues to press in, but your core stays warm, a glowing centre shielded by layers of hide and softened air. Your thoughts drift toward the way cold shapes sleep patterns themselves. Reports gathered from diverse frontier recollections suggest that people rarely slept in long uninterrupted stretches during frigid nights. Instead, they slipped in and out, waking, to adjust bedding, to warm fingers, to listen for danger. You feel that rhythm now, half dozing, half alert, drifting between comfort and the instinct to check on your own warmth. A distant crack echoes across the forest. Your eyes open, then drift closed again. The sound might be a falling branch or settling ice, but your body notices, registers, decides, and relaxes. That quiet appraisal, never fully conscious, kept countless winter travellers alive. You begin to understand how the body becomes both sentinel and sleeper, in cold conditions doing two jobs at once. You rub your forearm, then shift your knee. Warmth flows toward your centre. Fatigue nudges you deeper into drowsiness. Hunger hums quietly beneath your ribs. Every sensation feels amplified by the cold, sharper, clearer, closer to the core of what it means to be alive out here. You rest your head on your arm. Your breaths lengthen. The warmth beneath your robe deepens into a soft glow that spreads through your torso. The cold outside feels less threatening now, just a constant presence beyond the edge of your nest. And as you lie there, letting your body adjust in small instinctive ways, you understand that survival in the mountains wasn't only about fires, shelters or hides. It was about how the human body adapted in real time to the great indifferent winter, reshaping itself one breath, one curl, one heartbeat at a time. Wrapped in that quiet resilience, you drift towards sleep once more. You breathe slowly, letting warmth settle inward as the cold outside curls around your shelter like a patient creature. The ember bed glows faintly beneath your pine boughs, giving you just enough heat to stay relaxed without drifting into deep, vulnerable sleep. In this softened lull, your thoughts drift toward one more hidden challenge of winter nights in the mountains, the stillness itself. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet that presses against your ears until the world feels emptied. In such deep silence, many mountain men relied on stories, beliefs, and tiny rituals to keep the mind anchored. You feel yourself entering that same hush now, the world around you dim and waiting. You close your eyes halfway. The forest holds its breath. Even the wind pauses. In this hush, your heartbeat feels louder, as if reminding you that you are still here, still warm, still alive. Material preserved in remote winter caches hints that travellers sometimes kept small carved tokens or folded scraps of cloth, not merely for sentiment but to steady the mind during long stretches of silence. You imagine turning such an object between your gloved fingers, now a smooth wooden bead. Perhaps its touch grounding you against the emptiness outside. The darkness seems to shift around the edges of your vision, not threatening exactly, but vast, too vast for comfort. You inhale carefully. Somewhere across the mountains, stories once passed between winter camps spoke of listening to the land itself in these quiet hours. A stray fireside recollection carried through several generations describes a moment when a man believed he heard the snow breathing. Not literally, but in the rhythmic settling of drifts under the weight of the night. You listen now and the idea begins to make sense. The cold has its own pulse. You shift your weight, adjusting your robe so it drapes more snugly around your shoulders. Thoughts rise and fall within you like slow waves. Patterns visible in surviving tools whisper of how trappers filled this silence with habit, rubbing a handle, smooth tightening a strap, checking a pouch again and again. These motions served no urgent need, yet their repetition soothed nerves stretched thin by deep night. You can almost feel your own hand drifting toward your belt, touching something familiar, simply to confirm that you remain tethered to your surroundings. A faint, elusive sound creeps across the clearing, perhaps snow slipping from a branch. Your eyes open, your breath steadies, and you wait. Nothing follows. In this quiet, even small noises take on weight. Your mind tries to assign meaning where there may be none. Such moments made winter nights feel longer than daylight hours, as though time thickened around you. You return to slow breathing, letting the tension ease. The silence folds itself around you again. In the absence of sound, imagination stretches. Some winter travellers spoke of seeing movement in the corner of their vision, just flickers, soft distortions of moonlight on snow. A handful of regional storytellers recount an oddly specific memory involving the moon creating the illusion of walking shadows. You understand why such tales took root. The cold thins your focus. The stillness sharpens every flicker of light. Your fingers curl beneath your robe, finding warmth. Your toes twitch inside your boots. You become aware of your body in a new way. The cold above the warmth below, the tension at your shoulders, melting inch by inch. Silence brings you closer to yourself, even if it brings a touch of unease. You can feel your pulse through the pine boughs. You turn your head slightly. The world remains unchanged, pale and patient under the moon. Yet your thoughts drift to all the men who lay as you do, wrapped in fur, staring at nothing, while their minds wandered to places both comforting and unsettling. Some used stories to keep their thoughts from spinning into unease. Others tapped rhythms on their blankets or hummed under their breath to break the quiet. You imagine humming now, barely audible, just enough sound to remind you that silence isn't absolute. There is something both soothing and uncomfortable about this emptiness. The lack of noise forces your mind inward. In such moments, worries rise about the cold, about the next day's trail, about food, about unseen dangers. From what comparative analyses reveal, certainty is impossible on the issue of how deeply this silence affected winter travellers. Some seemed unfazed. Others hinted through scattered comments that the nights felt like a test of inner steadiness. Lying here, you feel the truth might shift from night to night depending on how tired or hungry or lonely a man happened to be. You adjust the pine boughs beneath your shoulder, creating a softer cradle. The silence seems to respond, growing smoother, almost gentle. You watch your own breath drift upward in a thin plume curling through a shaft of moonlight. It feels like the only movement in the world. The hush presses closer, but now it feels less like emptiness and more like a blanket, cold on the outside, warm underneath. Your robe settles around you as you stretch your legs, easing the stiffness in your knees. Slowly, the silence becomes familiar rather than oppressive. You begin to sense its texture, soft, deep, unforgiving, but not hostile. It is the natural state of the mountains in winter, not an enemy but an atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, sleep grows gentle. You allow your breath to lengthen. The forest stirs faintly. Your eyelids drift lower. The silence holds you like a steady hand. And as you rest inside this vast soundless landscape, you understand why seasoned winter travellers learn to accept the quiet rather than fight it to let it wash over them. Shape them, cradle them until morning. Wrapped in fir pine and a silence as old as the peaks round you, you drift once again toward rest. You breathe slowly, letting the immense quiet wrap around your shelter one more time when a new sensation nudges at your awareness. The night is beginning its slow shift toward dawn. Not brightly, not warmly, but with the faintest alteration in the air, the kind mountain men knew well. The last hours before sunrise were always the coldest, the most unforgiving, the most capable of stealing strength even from seasoned bodies. As you settle deeper into your bedding, you begin to feel that edge sharpening around you the moment when warmth becomes fleeting, and the coming day feels impossibly far away. You nestle further into your robe, sensing the cold pressing tightly around your makeshift nest. The snow outside seems to glow more faintly than before, and the air feels thinner, sharper. Notes inferred from weathered trail diaries point toward this pre-dawn cold snapping harder than any other hour, often catching sleepers off guard. You imagine the air around you tightening, the warmth you've carefully gathered beginning to leak away in small stubborn eddies. You shift your weight on the pine boughs. The needles crack softly beneath you, brittle from the freezing night. A curious recollection occasionally echoed through families descended from winter. Travellers describes this hour as the wolf time, not because of predators, but because even a healthy man might grow restless, pacing in and out of sleep while fighting the cold's last fiercest grasp. You feel that itch now, that desire to move, as if your muscles want to rise, but your body insists on conserving heat. Your breath drifts upward and vanishes almost instantly. You press your hands against your ribs beneath the robe, trying to trap the warmth before it slips away. The ember bed beneath you is barely alive, its heat, faint but still present. That tiny warmth matters. You sense how mountain men gauge these moments, carefully choosing whether to rebuild the fire or conserve their fuel until daylight. In some cases, a decision made at this hour influenced the entire day ahead. You curl your knees tighter, shrinking into a smaller shape. Your body's heat gathers inward. The cold tries to infiltrate your robe through the smallest gaps at the collar, at the wrists, at the ankles. You tug the hide in closer, smoothing it along your legs, sealing the edges. A soft tremor rolls along your arms. You rub them, generating friction. In faint writings of winter wanderers, There are mentions of gentle, self-shaking, not shivering, but deliberate motions to keep circulation awake. The idea was simple: convince your body to stay alert without burning energy too quickly. You try it now, just a small shake of the shoulders and wrists, and feel a flicker of warmth return. Your eyelids grow heavy, but you know better than to sink too deeply into sleep at this hour. The cold nibbles at your toes again, sharper now, more insistent. You shift them inside your boots, flexing, coaxing warmth back into them. The pine boughs have cooled noticeably, losing the heat they borrowed from your nest. You turn onto your side, tucking your feet beneath your thighs, an instinct straight from winter travellers who learned that body heat required strategic sharing. Your thoughts drift quietly toward the horizon, even though you cannot see it. Somewhere far beyond the trees and ridges, dawn is shaping itself slowly, as if deciding whether to arrive. A handful of winter reminiscences from former mountain families speak of sensing sunrise before seeing it, feeling it as the faintest softening of darkness. Perhaps your mind plays tricks at this hour, but you sense something similar now, like a gentle shift in the air's texture. You breathe deeply into the folds of your robe. The air warms slightly before reaching your lungs. You exhale, releasing it slowly. The cold continues its steady insistence, but now it feels less aggressive, more like a test of endurance. Your fingers tingle as you adjust your bedding again. The robe's interior feels slightly damp from your breath and body heat, but not dangerously so. The cold keeps that moisture in check. You tighten your grip on the robe, pulling it snug around your neck. Your mind wanders through the experience of these last pre-dawn hours, how they stretched like a long, narrow tunnel that every winter traveller had to pass through. Some reflections found in environmental studies of frontier living propose that people may have adapted psychologically to this pattern, bracing for this cold peak even while half asleep. Others believe the body simply endured without prediction or planning. The variety of interpretations underscores how personal this struggle must have been. Your breathing grows steadier. A faint numbness in your fingers retreats as warmth slowly returns. The cold still circles, but your shelter holds. The pine beneath you feels rough but supportive. Your robe remains your strongest shield. You grow aware of the world, beginning a subtle transition. The darkness feels a shade less absolute. The cold remains heavy and fierce, but something in the air suggests movement toward morning's edge. You turn your head, letting your gaze follow the faint outlines of trees etched against the dim sky. Soon the first strands of dawn will slip across the mountains, but for now you remain in this fragile hour, curled tightly, breathing slow, conserving warmth, while the night makes its final claim. And though the cold presses with its full strength, you sense that you're past its worst. Your body has endured. Your shelter holds. The coming morning feels close enough to touch, even if only in imagination. Wrapped in your hard-earned warmth, you wait for the day to rise over the frozen world. You lie very still now, feeling the faintest shift of the night around you, as though the darkness itself has tired and begun to loosen its grip. Your breath moves slowly, rising in pale wisps that fade into the dim air above your shelter. The robe around your shoulders has grown familiar, almost like a second skin moulded by hours of warmth and careful adjustment. And as you rest within this fragile cradle of pine fur and perseverance, your thoughts drift toward the final essential truth of cold weather nights, the subtle art of waking without losing the precious heat you fought so hard to gather. You shift slightly, mindful of every movement. If you wake too fast, the cold rushes in. If you linger too long, half asleep, numbness might creep into limbs before you notice. Insights found in old mountain-era supply logs suggest that experienced travellers woke in slow increments, letting their minds rise before their bodies did, listening first to the world around them. You follow this pattern, now keeping your eyes half closed, while your senses stretch outward, testing the night. A faint pop comes from the ember bed, a soft, gentle sound. You imagine tiny sparks glowing beneath the ash, ready to return to life but too weak to warm you unless stirred. A subtle, rarely mentioned recollection that drifted through winter storytelling circles describes how some men kept a small twig tucked beneath their robe, ready to feed the coals the instant they woke so the fire could revive before the cold stole their strength. You imagine reaching for such a twig now, feeling its ridged surface under your glove, your fingers flex still warm but cautious. Moving slowly, you loosen the robe only at your shoulders, keeping your core tightly wrapped. The cold air touches your cheek like an unfamiliar hand. Your breath catches for a moment, then steadies. The world around you feels suspended in a pale, expectant silence. You push yourself upright in tiny degrees, your muscles protest stiff from the long night. The pine boughs beneath you shift with soft crackles. A few traces of what might be dawn appear at the edge of the clearing, not light yet, but a thinning in the darkness, a slight softening of the shadows. Interpretations among modern wilderness historians vary as to how precisely mountain travellers sense these first hints of morning, whether from temperature shifts, changes in the sky's colour, or instinct honed by repetition. But lying here, you feel something unmistakable. The night is loosening. You bring the robe tighter around your torso and lean slightly forward, allowing warm air from within the folds to brush your face. Your toes twitch in your boots, feeling the lingering cold. You press your boots gently against each other, letting friction bring them back toward warmth. Your hands rub along your upper arms, coaxing circulation awake. For a moment you stay like this, crouched, wrapped, breathing slow, letting your body remember itself. Soon you will stand, and the cold will bite sharper than ever. Dawn's arrival always comes paired with its harshest chill, but you are not rushing. Winter mornings favoured patience. A hurried movement could tear open the warmth you spent all night building. You glance at your ember bed again. The faint orange beneath the ash glimmers weakly but still alive. You know you can coax it back, feed it gently, turn it into flame once more, but not yet. First you must finish awakening the body as carefully as you tended the fire. You stretch your hand slightly and feel the cold sting your fingertips. You tuck your hand back under the robe, waiting for warmth to return. This rhythm wake test, retreat warm test again, shape the first moments of every winter dawn in the mountains. Gradually your breath deepens, your shoulders relax, and your core remains steady with heat. You know morning is near. You know you have endured this night as so many before you endured theirs. And you feel in the quiet of these last moments before dawn something like quiet triumph. Wrapped in hidden resolve, you rise into the edge of the coming day. You sit quietly for a moment longer, feeling the gentle dimness settle across your thoughts, as if the world itself is exhaling after a long, cold night. The clearing around you softens into a blur, the edges smoothing, the sharpness easing. That faint suggestion of dawn becomes less important now, fading into a distant whisper as you allow your mind to loosen, to unwind, to drift. You picture your breathing slowing, each inhale stretching a little longer, each exhale melting into the air like warm mist. The cold that once pressed so fiercely against your shelter feels softer now, almost weightless, as though winter itself has stepped back to give you room to rest. Your body relaxes in small waves, the shoulders first, then the muscles around your eyes, then the slow release in your hands and feet. Everything becomes heavy in the most comforting way, as though the pine beneath you has become a cradle rather than a bed on frozen ground. The last faint glow of your ember bed becomes a tiny comfort, warming the space in your imagination just enough to feel safe. You let that warmth float through you, gentle and slow, like the lingering echo of a dream. Far above you, the mountains feel quiet, timeless still. Nothing demands your attention now. Nothing pulls at your thoughts. You have earned this rest. Allow your breath to settle even more. Let the world drift a little farther away. Feel the cold night dissolve into something soft and distant, leaving only the warmth you've gathered and the calm you've built. let your mind sink deeper into stillness, deeper into slow, peaceful quiet. And now, let it all fade. Let your thoughts settle like snow. Sweet dreams,